The wind cut like broken glass. Caleb Vance felt it through his coat, through his shirt, straight down to the bone. February in the Montana Territory wasn't weather, it was punishment. But he'd endured worse. 3 weeks on trains, then a stagecoach that nearly threw a wheel twice, then the final leg on a wagon driven by a man who didn't speak except to spit tobacco. All of it worth it, he'd told himself, all of it leading to something better. The town of Millward Creek appeared through the snow like a half-finished thought. Wood buildings, most of them new enough that the paint hadn't faded yet. A main street barely wide enough for 2 wagons to pass. Mountains rising behind it all, indifferent and eternal. Population maybe 200, if you counted generously. The kind of place where everyone knew your name by sundown and your business by morning. Caleb stepped down from the wagon, and his boots hit frozen mud with a crunch that sounded too loud. He was a big man, 6'4", 240 pounds of muscle earned from years of smithing work. His hands were scarred, his face was weathered, and his nose had been broken twice. He wasn't ugly, but he wasn't the kind of handsome that made women turn their heads for good reasons. "Vance?" The wagon driver squinted up at him. "Yeah. Good luck." The way he said it didn't sound encouraging. The wagon rattled away, leaving Caleb standing in the middle of the street with his leather bag and a knot in his stomach that had been growing for the last 100 miles. He'd corresponded with Margaret Talbot for 6 months, letters back and forth, hers always neat and precise, his own cramped and awkward because writing had never come easy. She'd written about the town, about her late husband who'd died in a mining accident, about how lonely it got when winter settled in hard. She'd sent a photograph, a serious woman with dark hair pulled back, her expression unreadable but not unkind. He'd sent his own photograph back, been honest about his size, his work, his lack of education beyond basic reading and numbers. She'd written back saying it didn't matter, that she was looking for a good man, not a perfect one. That had been 2 months ago. Now he stood in front of the general store where she'd told him to meet her, and the knot in his stomach pulled tighter. The door opened, and a woman stepped out. Margaret Talbot looked exactly like her photograph, which was somehow worse. It made the whole thing feel more real, more final. She wore a dark dress, practical and well-made, and a coat that had seen better years. Her face was pale, whether from cold or shock, Caleb couldn't tell. "Mr. Vance." Her voice was steady, but her eyes weren't. They moved over him like she was tallying up everything wrong, every inch of him that didn't match whatever she'd imagined. "Ma'am." He took off his hat. "It's good to finally meet you." She didn't respond right away. Behind her, the store door opened again, and 2 women peered out, curious. Then a man, then another. Word traveled fast in small towns. "You're—" Margaret started, then stopped. She folded her arms across her chest. "You're larger than I expected. I wrote about my size." Caleb kept his voice level. "Sent measurements and everything." "Yes, but—" She looked away, then back, and something in her expression shifted from surprise to decision. Not a good decision. "I'm sorry, Mr. Vance. I made a mistake." The world got very quiet. "A mistake," Caleb repeated. "I thought I could, but I can't. You're too—" She gestured vaguely, like the word she wanted was hanging in the air somewhere. "You're too much. I'm sorry. I can't marry you." Behind her, someone laughed. Not loud, but Caleb heard it. His face went hot despite the cold. "I came 3 weeks," he said. "Sold everything I had for the train fare. I'll pay you back." Margaret's voice got firmer, like she was convincing herself. "Eventually. But I can't. I won't." She took a step back. "I'm sorry." She turned and walked back into the store. The door shut behind her with a click that sounded like a lock. Caleb stood there, hat in hand, while the cold seeped into his bones, and the small crowd that had gathered stared at him like he was something that had crawled out of the mountains. A woman whispered to her companion. A man shook his head, grinning. A boy, maybe 12, pointed and said something that made his mother swat his hand down, but not before Caleb saw the laughter in both their faces. Too much. He'd heard that before. Different context, same meaning. Too big for the schoolhouse chairs. Too rough for the church socials. Too intimidating for the girls who looked away when he walked past. He'd thought maybe in a frontier town where size meant strength and strength meant survival, it would be different. He'd been wrong. Caleb put his hat back on, picked up his bag, and started walking. He didn't have a destination, didn't have a plan. The town spread out before him in all its shabby glory: storefronts, a saloon, a building marked Millward Creek Gazette, a blacksmith shop with smoke coming from its chimney, and at the far end of the street, a small church with a cross on top. His boots crunched through the snow. Behind him, he heard voices rising in conversation, speculation, amusement. The big man who got rejected. The fool who traveled across the country for a woman who took one look and said no. He walked until he reached the church. It wasn't much. Wood frame, white paint, flaking in places, windows that looked drafty. But the door was unlocked, and when he pushed it open, the interior was marginally warmer than outside. Rows of pews, a simple altar, and a silence that felt heavier than the cold. Caleb set his bag down in the last pew and sat. His pride hurt worse than his body, which was saying something after 3 weeks of traveling. He'd been rejected before, sure, but never like this. Never after hope had been offered and accepted. Never in front of an audience. "Too much," he said to the empty room. The church didn't answer. He sat there as afternoon faded into evening, as the light through the windows went from gray to darker gray. Nobody came to check on him. Nobody knocked on the door to offer shelter or sympathy. In Millward Creek, it seemed, strangers who got rejected were problems that solved themselves, usually by leaving on the next stage out. But Caleb wasn't leaving. He didn't know why exactly. Stubbornness, maybe. Or the fact that he had nowhere else to go. Or maybe just the raw, burning certainty that he was tired of being told he was too much, too big, too wrong to deserve a place in the world. He stretched out on the pew, using his bag as a pillow. The wood was hard, the cold crept in through gaps in the walls, and sleep came in fits and starts. But he'd slept in worse places. When morning came, so did the cold reality. Caleb woke to someone shaking his shoulder. He jerked upright, disoriented, and found himself looking at a thin man in his 50s with a concerned expression and a clerical collar. "Son, you can't sleep here," the man said. Not unkind, but firm. "Sorry." Caleb's voice was rough from sleep and cold. "I'll go." "Where?" Good question. Caleb grabbed his bag and stood, which made the man take an involuntary step back. "I'll figure something out. You're the fellow who came for Margaret Talbot." It wasn't a question. Of course, everyone knew already. "Was," Caleb said. Past tense. The pastor, because who else would he be, studied him with eyes that had seen plenty of trouble. "I'm Pastor Whitmore. You have money for a room?" "Some." "Mrs. Brennan runs a boarding house. Tell her I sent you. She won't turn you away." He paused. "People talk in small towns. Don't take it personal." Little late for that. Caleb walked out into a morning that was somehow colder than the night before. The sky was heavy with the promise of more snow. Main Street was quiet. Most folks still inside or just starting their days. He found the boarding house easy enough. A 2-story building with a hand-painted sign that said rooms, meals, clean beds. Mrs. Brennan turned out to be a stout woman in her 60s with gray hair and a no-nonsense expression. She looked him up and down when he knocked, and he saw the recognition in her eyes. The whole town knew. "Pastor sent you?" she said. "Yes, ma'am." $2 a week. That includes breakfast and dinner. No drinking in the rooms, no guests after 9, and you keep your space clean. Understood? "Yes, ma'am." She handed him a key. "Top of the stairs, last door on the left. Bathroom's shared. Don't use all the hot water." The room was small, bed, dresser, chair, window overlooking the street. But it was warm, and the bed was clean, and right now that was more than Caleb had expected. He dropped his bag, sat on the bed, and felt the exhaustion of the last 3 weeks crash over him. He slept until afternoon. When he woke, his stomach was growling, and he could hear activity on the street below. He washed his face in cold water from the basin, changed his shirt, and headed downstairs. Mrs. Brennan was in the dining room setting out plates. "Dinner's at 6, she said without looking at him. "You missed lunch." "I'll find something." "Try the saloon. They serve food till 4. Caleb walked to the saloon, which was called the Lucky Pine, and looked like every other frontier saloon. Bar along one wall, tables scattered around, sawdust on the floor, and the smell of whiskey and tobacco. A few men looked up when he entered, and the conversation paused for half a second before resuming. He ordered stew and coffee. The bartender, a lean man with a scar across his cheek, slid both across the bar without comment. Caleb ate slowly, aware of the glances, the whispers. He caught fragments of conversation from a nearby table. Came all this way. Margaret saw sense. Imagine waking up to that every morning. Laughter. Caleb finished his stew, left coins on the bar, and walked out. The cold hit him like a fist, but he welcomed it. Anger was starting to burn through the shame, hot and clarifying. He walked without thinking, past the general store where Margaret had rejected him, past the newspaper office, past shops and homes until he found himself standing in front of the blacksmith shop. Smoke curled from the chimney. Through the open door, he could see the glow of the forge and hear the rhythmic clang of hammer on anvil. Caleb stood there, watching, until the smith noticed him and stopped working. The man was in his 60s, barrel-chested, with arms like tree trunks, and a face weathered by decades of heat and hard work. He wiped sweat from his forehead with a rag and squinted at Caleb. "Help you? You need an assistant?" The smith snorted. "Got enough mouths to feed." "I'm a smith. Worked a forge for 8 years in Pennsylvania. I'm good with repair work, horseshoes, tools, metalwork of any kind." "You the fellow came for Margaret?" There it was again. Caleb's jaw tightened. "Yeah." "Then you're leaving on the next stage." "No." "Son, I'm staying." Caleb's voice was level, but something in it made the smith pause. "I need work. You need help whether you admit it or not. I saw 3 wagons outside waiting for repairs." The smith looked at the wagons, then back at Caleb. "I don't need a partner. I'm not asking for partnership. Just work. Pay me fair, and I'll work harder than anyone you've had." "Why? Why stay in a town where everyone knows you got turned away?" "Because I'm tired of running." The words came out before Caleb could think about them, but once they were out, he knew they were true. He'd spent his whole life being too much, moving from place to place, never quite fitting. He was done with it. The smith studied him for a long moment. "Name's Garrett Finch, and I'm not promising anything, but if you can shoe that horse by the end of the day without it kicking you or the shoe coming loose, I'll consider it." He pointed to a gray mare tied near the forge, and Caleb knew a test when he saw one. The mare had a reputation, probably. Bad-tempered or nervous or both. "Deal," Caleb said. He spent the next 3 hours working with that horse. It was skittish, dancing away every time he approached, and twice it tried to bite him. But Caleb had patience, and he had experience with difficult animals. He talked to the mare, low and steady, and eventually she settled enough for him to work. The horseshoe went on clean and tight, and when he was done, Finch came over to inspect it. "Not bad," Finch admitted grudgingly. "Come back tomorrow, 6 in the morning. We'll see if you last the week." It wasn't a yes, but it wasn't a no. Caleb walked back to the boarding house as evening settled over the town, and for the first time since he'd arrived in Millward Creek, he felt something other than shame. It wasn't hope, not yet, but it was possibility. Mrs. Brennan's dining room was full when he arrived for dinner. 6 other boarders, all of them men who worked at the sawmill or the mine. They looked up when Caleb entered, and the conversation died. He sat at the empty seat at the end of the table. Mrs. Brennan brought out roast chicken, potatoes, and bread. "Pass things around," she said to the table. "We're civilized here." For a few minutes, the only sound was plates being filled and utensils scraping. Then one of the men, a stocky fellow with a thick beard, spoke up. "You're the one came for Margaret Talbot." Caleb kept his eyes on his plate. "That's right. Hell of a trip to make for nothing." "Yep. She sure changed her mind quick." "She did." Another man, younger, with a mean glint in his eye, leaned forward. "Guess she wasn't expecting someone quite so large." Snickers around the table. Caleb set down his fork carefully. "You got something to say? Say it." The young man grinned. "Just wondering if you scared her off is all. Big fellow like you could be intimidating to a woman." "Tommy, Mrs." Brennan's voice cut through the room like a knife. Mind your manners or eat outside. Tommy held up his hands. Just making conversation. Make it elsewhere. The rest of the meal passed in tense silence. Caleb ate mechanically, tasting nothing. When he finished, he went up to his room and lay on the bed, staring at the ceiling. The shame was back, hot and heavy. But underneath it, that anger still burned. He'd show them. All of them. He didn't know how yet, but he'd find a way. The next morning, he showed up at Finch's forge at 6 sharp. The smith was already working, heating iron until it glowed red. "You're on time," Finch said. "That's something." "What do you need done?" Finch pointed to a pile of tools in the corner. Axes, saws, plows, all of them needing repair or sharpening. "Start there. I'll watch." Caleb worked. He heated, hammered, shaped, cooled. His hands remembered the rhythm, even after months away from a forge. Finch watched for the first hour, saying nothing, then went back to his own work. They worked side by side until noon, when Finch finally spoke. "You know what you're doing." "Told you I did." "Knowing and doing are different things." Finch wiped his face. "You can stay. $4 a week to start, more if you prove yourself." $4 wouldn't make him rich, but it was a start. Caleb nodded. "Appreciate it." "Don't thank me yet. Works hard, and folks around here—" Finch trailed off. "They talk. You're going to hear things. Already have. It'll get worse before it gets better. Margaret's got friends, and they'll make sure everyone knows you weren't good enough." "I can handle it." Finch looked doubtful but didn't argue. Over the next week, Caleb fell into a routine. Up before dawn, work at the forge until dark, dinner at the boarding house, then sleep. The work was brutal, 10, 12 hours a day of heat and hammering and muscle-straining effort. But it was familiar, and familiarity was a kind of comfort. The town, though, the town was something else. He heard whispers whenever he walked to the forge, saw people cross the street to avoid him, got stares from children and suspicious looks from their parents. In the saloon, conversation stopped when he entered. At the general store, the clerk served him last, even when he'd been waiting longer than others. Margaret Talbot, he learned, worked as a seamstress and lived above the dress shop. He saw her twice in passing, once when she crossed the street to avoid him, and once when she glanced out her window as he walked by. Both times she looked away quickly, like the sight of him was shameful. Maybe it was. The boarding house wasn't much better. Tommy, the young miner, seemed to take particular pleasure in needling him. "How's the work going, big man?" he'd ask at dinner. "Making enough to buy your way into Margaret's good graces?" Or, "Heard you're quite the smith. Cheat. Maybe you could forge yourself a new face. Might help with the ladies." Caleb never responded. Mrs. Brennan would snap at Tommy, but it didn't stop him. It was like the kid had decided Caleb was fair game, and nothing would change his mind. 2 weeks in, something shifted. Caleb was at the forge, working on a set of hinges for the sawmill, when a woman walked in. She was in her late 20s, wearing a simple dress and a coat that had been mended more than once. Her face was striking, not beautiful in the conventional sense, but strong-boned and arresting. A scar ran from her left temple down to her jaw, pale against her skin. She stopped when she saw Caleb, and for a moment he braced for the usual reaction, the stare, the uncomfortable pause, the quick exit. But she just nodded. "Mr. Finch around?" "Out back," Caleb said. "Can I help with something?" She held up a broken lantern. Handle snapped. Thought he could fix it. Caleb set down his hammer. "I can do it. Give me a few minutes." She handed over the lantern without hesitation, which surprised him. Most people in this town wouldn't trust him with a kitchen spoon. He examined the break, heated a piece of iron, and shaped a new handle. It took maybe 15 minutes. When he handed it back, the woman tested the handle's strength and nodded, satisfied. "How much?" "No charge. It's a small fix." "I can pay." "I know, but you don't have to." She studied him for a moment, her expression unreadable. "You're the one came for Margaret." Caleb tensed. "Yeah." That was unfortunate. That's one word for it. "She's not a bad person, just scared." "Of what? Me?" The bitterness leaked into his voice before he could stop it. The woman tilted her head slightly, considering. of making another mistake. Her first husband died 2 years ago, and it nearly broke her. She thought if she remarried, it would fix things. But fear doesn't work that way. She paused. I'm Eliza Hart. I run the orphanage at the edge of town. Caleb Vance. I know. She smiled slightly, and it transformed her face. Everyone knows. Small town. So I've noticed. People here are... She searched for the word. Protective. We've had trouble with drifters and men passing through who cause problems. You're new, you're big, and Margaret's rejection made you an easy target for gossip. I'm not causing trouble. I didn't say you were. Eliza turned the lantern in her hands. But proving that is going to take time and work. I've got both. Good. She headed toward the door, then paused. Thank you for the repair. Anytime. She left, and Caleb went back to work, but something had shifted. Not much, just a fraction. But it was the first conversation he'd had in Millward Creek where someone treated him like a person instead of a problem. That evening, he asked Mrs. Brennan about Eliza Hart. The older woman's expression softened. She's one of the good ones. Came here 5 years ago, opened the orphanage with money her father left her. Takes in kids who've got nowhere else to go. Parents died in mining accidents, disease. Sometimes they're just abandoned. She runs that place on a shoestring, but those children are fed, clothed, and educated. The scar? Fire. Back east, before she came here. She doesn't talk about it much. Mrs. Brennan gave him a shrewd look. She's not like Margaret. Eliza sees people for who they are, not what they look like. Wasn't asking for that reason. Sure you weren't. But maybe he was. Not romantically. He wasn't ready for that. Might never be. But the idea that someone in this town might see past his size, past the rejection, past the whispers, it was something to hold on to. The weeks crawled by. March came in with more snow and wind that made the forge work even harder. Caleb's hands were constantly raw, his back perpetually sore, but the work itself was satisfying. Finch was a good teacher, patient when Caleb asked questions, quick to point out better techniques. And gradually, the pile of broken tools shrank, replaced by new work, repairs, orders, commissions. People still stared, still whispered, but a few started to nod when he passed. The clerk at the general store stopped serving him last. Small victories, but they mattered. Then came the day that changed everything. Caleb was at the forge working on a set of gate hinges when Finch called him over to the front. Eliza Hart was there, along with a man Caleb recognized as Charles Whitmore, the pastor's nephew and one of the town council members. Miss Hart has a proposal, Finch said. Thought you should hear it. Eliza looked at Caleb directly. The orphanage needs a bell tower. The children have no way to signal lessons or meals or emergencies. I've been trying to raise money for 2 years, but it's slow going. Mr. Whitmore suggested we might find someone willing to do the work for less than usual. Free, Whitmore clarified. We're asking for volunteers. Caleb looked between them. You want me to build a bell tower? You and whoever else is willing to help, Eliza said. Mr. Finch said you've done carpentry work before. Some, nothing that big. We have plans. Materials would be donated from the sawmill. It's just the labor we need. She paused. I understand if you're too busy. I'll do it. The words came out before he'd thought them through. Finch looked surprised. Whitmore raised his eyebrows. But Eliza just nodded, like she'd expected nothing less. It'll be a lot of work, she warned. Probably take 2 months, maybe more. And you'd be doing it in your spare time. I know. Why? Whitmore asked bluntly. Why would you volunteer for this? You don't know anyone here. You don't owe this town anything. Caleb met his eyes. Because someone asked. It was the truth, but not the whole truth. The whole truth was more complicated. It involved pride and anger and the need to prove something to a town that had decided he wasn't worth knowing. But it also involved the memory of Eliza's kindness, the way she'd treated him like a person instead of a spectacle. And maybe, underneath everything, the hope that building something good might rebuild something in himself. Whitmore didn't look convinced, but he nodded. We'll start gathering materials. Miss Hart will provide the plans. When can you begin? This weekend. That's soon, Eliza said. Are you sure? The sooner we start, the sooner it's done. After they left, Finch gave Caleb a long look. That was either very smart or very stupid. Which one? I'll let you know when the tower's standing. Finch picked up his hammer. Or when you've run out of town, whichever comes first. That weekend, Caleb walked to the orphanage for the first time. It was at the edge of town, a 2-story building that looked sturdy enough but worn in the way of places that housed too many people with too little money. A yard out front currently covered in snow. A vegetable garden, dormant, a small barn, and 7 children ranging from maybe 5 to 14 who all stopped playing when Caleb approached. The youngest, a girl with braids, pointed at him. He's huge. Emma, the oldest boy said warningly. Eliza appeared in the doorway. Children, this is Mr. Vance. He's going to build us a bell tower. Why? Emma asked. Good question, Caleb thought. Because you need one. But why are you doing it? This from the oldest boy, thin and serious. Because I can. The children didn't look satisfied with that answer, but they didn't argue. Eliza led Caleb around back, where a cleared space waited for the tower. She unrolled the plans on a makeshift table, detailed drawings showing a structure maybe 20 feet tall, with a platform for the bell and a rope system for ringing it. It's ambitious, Caleb said, studying the plans. Too ambitious? No, just, it's going to take time. He looked at her. You sure about this? About me doing it? Why wouldn't I be? I'm not exactly popular in this town. Popularity isn't a requirement for carpentry. Eliza rolled up the plans. Besides, the children need this, and from what I've seen, you need something to build. She was more perceptive than he'd given her credit for. The work began the next day. The sawmill delivered lumber, good, solid pine beams and planks. Caleb laid out the foundation, measuring twice and 3 times because precision mattered. The children watched from a distance, curious but cautious. By the end of the first day, he had the basic footings done. By the end of the first week, the frame was taking shape. Word spread, of course. In Millward Creek, everything spread. People walked by the orphanage to see what the big man was building. Some offered advice. Most just watched, and the whispers continued, now with a different edge. What's he trying to prove? Thinks he can buy his way into people's good graces. Margaret's probably kicking herself now. Don't be ridiculous. Look at him. Caleb heard it all and kept working, hammer and nails, beams and braces. The tower rose slowly, stubbornly, despite the cold and the wind and the ache in his muscles. Finch gave him time off on Sundays to work on it, which was generous. Eliza brought him coffee and sometimes food, which he accepted gratefully. The children gradually warmed to him. Emma, the youngest, started asking him questions. How tall was he? Could he lift a horse? Had he ever fought a bear? Caleb answered patiently, sometimes honestly, sometimes with exaggerations that made them laugh. The oldest boy, whose name was Samuel, was harder to crack. He watched Caleb with suspicion, like he was waiting for the big man to do something wrong. But slowly, over weeks, that suspicion faded into something closer to acceptance. 4 weeks in, disaster struck. Caleb was working on the platform level when the weather turned. Wind picked up out of nowhere, gusting hard enough to make the whole structure sway. He should have stopped, should have climbed down and waited it out. But he was close to finishing the platform and he wanted it done. The gust that hit him came from the side, sudden and vicious. The ladder slipped. Caleb grabbed for a beam, missed, and fell 12 feet to the frozen ground. The impact knocked the air from his lungs. Pain exploded in his left side, sharp and immediate. He lay there, stunned, while the world spun and his ribs screamed protest. Mr. Vance! Eliza's voice, distant and urgent. He tried to sit up and immediately regretted it. The pain doubled. Don't move! Eliza knelt beside him, her face pale. Samuel, get Dr. Brennan, now! The boy took off running. I'm fine, Caleb managed. You're not fine. You fell 12 feet. Just bruised. Ribs, probably. Maybe worse. Her hands were gentle but firm as she checked for obvious breaks. Why didn't you come down when the wind picked up? Wanted to finish. Idiot, she said, but there was worry in her voice, not anger. Dr. Brennan, Mrs. Brennan's husband, Caleb learned later, arrived and confirmed what Eliza suspected: 2 cracked ribs, extensive bruising, and a warning that Caleb was lucky it wasn't worse. "No heavy lifting for 2 weeks," Brennan ordered. "And I mean it. Those ribs need time to heal, or they'll break completely." 2 weeks. The tower was half finished, materials were stacking up, and Caleb had momentum. Stopping now felt like giving up. But he didn't have a choice. He spent those 2 weeks in frustration, watching from the boarding house window as spring slowly, grudgingly arrived. The snow melted in patches. The sky cleared occasionally, and the unfinished tower stood in the orphanage yard like an accusation. Eliza visited twice, bringing books she thought he might like and news from town. The second time she brought something else, a folded piece of paper. "What's this?" Caleb asked. "A petition. 23 signatures from people in town who want to help finish the tower." He unfolded it, scanned the names. Some he recognized, most he didn't. "Why?" "Because they saw you fall and keep trying. Because the children talk about you constantly. Because—" She paused. "Because sometimes people surprise you." Maybe. Or maybe they just felt guilty for how they'd treated him, and this was their way of making amends without actually apologizing. But it was something. When the 2 weeks ended, Caleb returned to the orphanage to find he wasn't working alone anymore. 5 men from town were there, including, surprisingly, Garrett Finch. They had tools, they had energy, and they had questions about what needed doing. Caleb told them. The work went faster with help. The platform was completed. The supports were reinforced. The bell mechanism was installed with precision and tested twice. And slowly, beam by beam, the tower took shape. Not everyone was supportive. Tommy at the boarding house made snide comments about charity cases and showing off. Margaret Talbot, on the one occasion Caleb saw her, looked away quickly, her expression unreadable. And there were still whispers, still doubts. But the tower kept rising. And somewhere in those weeks of work, of hammering and measuring and problem-solving, Caleb felt something shift inside him. The shame that had dogged him since arrival, that had followed him for years before that, began to crack, not disappear. He wasn't fool enough to think it would vanish completely, but it loosened its grip. He was building something good, something that would last. And maybe, in the process, he was building himself back up too. Part 2. The tower reached 15 feet by mid-April, and with it came a change Caleb hadn't anticipated. People stopped crossing the street when they saw him. Not all of them, but enough that he noticed. Mrs. Chen at the bakery nodded when he passed. Old Mr. Patterson, who ran the livery, actually spoke to him about the weather. Small gestures, but in a town that had written him off as a spectacle, they felt significant. The work itself became a rhythm. Mornings at Finch's forge, evenings and weekends at the tower. His ribs had healed, mostly, though they still ached when the weather shifted. The volunteers came and went, some reliable, others showing up once and never returning. But there were 3 who stuck. Finch, of course, a young carpenter named Daniel Ross who had good hands and better instincts, and Thomas Merrick, a miner in his 40s who didn't talk much but worked like he had something to prove. "Why are you helping?" Caleb asked Merrick one Saturday afternoon. They were hauling beams into position, and the question had been nagging at him. Merrick spat tobacco juice into the dirt. "Lost my daughter 3 years back. Fever took her. These orphans got nobody, but they got Miss Hart. Figure that's worth something." "I'm sorry, about your daughter." "Yeah." Merrick lifted his end of the beam. "We gonna stand here talking, or we gonna build?" They built. Eliza was a constant presence, not hovering but available. She brought water when the work got hot, bandages when someone inevitably caught a splinter or scraped knuckles. The children orbited around the construction site like curious birds, watching, asking questions, occasionally getting shooed away when the work got dangerous. Emma, the youngest, had taken particular interest in Caleb. She'd appointed herself his shadow, appearing whenever he worked to deliver important observations. "Your hands are really big," she announced one afternoon, watching him measure a beam. "They are," Caleb agreed. "Bigger than my whole head, probably." "Probably. Can you pick me up with one hand?" "Emma," Samuel called from across the yard, "leave Mr. Vance alone." "I'm not bothering him. Am I bothering you?" Caleb looked down at her serious little face. No, but I've got to focus on this measurement, so maybe ask me again later. Okay? She scampered off, satisfied. Samuel approached, his expression apologetic. Sorry, she gets excited. It's fine. Caleb marked the beam with a pencil. You're good with them, the younger ones. Somebody has to be. Samuel was 14 but carried himself older, like responsibility had aged him faster than years. Miss Hart does her best, but there's only so much one person can do. How long have you been here? 4 years. My parents died in a mining collapse. I was 10. He said it matter-of-factly, like he'd long since made peace with it. Most of us got similar stories. Dead parents, abandoned, or folks who couldn't feed another mouth. Miss Hart takes anyone who needs a place. She's got a good heart. She does. Samuel watched Eliza across the yard, helping one of the younger girls with her coat. People in town don't always appreciate it. They think charity is fine as long as they don't have to see it. But she makes them see it, makes them remember these kids exist. Caleb understood that. Being visible when people wanted you invisible, it took courage. The next Sunday, disaster struck again. Not the same kind as before, but close enough. They were working on the upper platform, the final section before the bell housing could be installed. Caleb was on a ladder, Daniel was steadying it from below, and Finch was on the platform itself, hammering braces into place. The structure was solid. They'd tested it thoroughly, but solid didn't mean invincible. The crack was small at first. A hairline fracture in one of the support beams they'd installed 2 weeks prior. Caleb saw it, his brain registering the danger half a second before physics caught up. The beam shifted, the platform tilted. "Get down!" he shouted. Finch looked up, saw the problem, and moved. But not fast enough. The beam gave way completely, and suddenly the entire platform was dropping, taking Finch with it. Caleb didn't think. He lunged, grabbed Finch's arm, and held on. The weight nearly pulled him off the ladder. His shoulders screamed. His recently healed ribs protested violently. But he held on while Daniel and Merrick scrambled to brace the fallen section from below. "I got you," Caleb ground out. "Don't let go." "Wasn't planning to," Finch gasped. It took 3 men and a lot of swearing to get Finch safely down and the platform stabilized. When it was over, they stood in the yard breathing hard, staring at the damaged section. "That beam was fine when we installed it," Daniel said. "I checked it myself." Caleb examined the break. It wasn't the beam. Look at the joint. This wasn't secured properly. "I secured it," Merrick said quietly. They all turned to look at him. 2 weeks ago. I thought I'd done it right, but he stared at the broken joint. If Finch had died, that would have been on me. But he didn't, Eliza said firmly. She'd appeared from the orphanage, her face pale but composed. No one died. We fix the damage and keep going. Miss Hart, we fix it, she repeated. Mistakes happen. What matters is how we respond. Merrick looked like he wanted to argue, but after a moment he just nodded. They spent the rest of the day reinforcing every joint, every connection, every beam. It was tedious work, and it set them back nearly 2 weeks. But no one complained. The near disaster had shaken them all. That evening, Caleb sat on the boarding house steps, watching the sun set behind the mountains. His body ached, his hands were raw, and his ribs felt like someone had kicked them repeatedly. He was contemplating whether to go inside or just sleep on the steps when someone sat down beside him. Eliza. You saved Garrett's life today, she said. Reflex. Still counts. She was quiet for a moment. The town's talking about it. About you. They're always talking about me. Differently now. Mrs. Chen told me she was wrong about you. Mr. Patterson said any man who'd risk himself like that has honor. Even Charles Whitmore admitted you might be worth knowing. High praise, Caleb said dryly. For this town? It is. She pulled her coat tighter against the evening chill. You're changing minds, whether you realize it or not. I'm just building a tower. No, you're doing more than that. She looked at him directly. You're proving you belong. The words hit harder than Caleb expected. Belonging, it's what he'd wanted since arriving in this frozen, judgmental town. Maybe what he'd wanted his whole life. What about you? He asked. What about me? You've been kind since day one. Why? Eliza touched her scar absently, a gesture that seemed unconscious. Because I know what it's like to be judged for how you look, to have people decide who you are before you open your mouth. She smiled slightly. And because you fixed my lantern without asking for anything in return. That told me more about your character than anything the gossips could say. They sat in comfortable silence as the sky darkened and stars began to appear. Caleb found himself noticing details he'd missed before, the way Eliza's hands were rough from work, the small smile that played at the corner of her mouth when she was thinking, the quiet strength she carried like armor. The tower should be done in 3 weeks, he said finally, if we don't have any more disasters. Don't say that, you'll jinx us. You believe in jinxes? I believe in Murphy's Law. Anything that can go wrong will go wrong, usually at the worst possible time. She stood, brushing off her skirt. Get some rest. Tomorrow's another day of proving everyone wrong. She walked away, and Caleb watched her go, feeling something he hadn't felt since before Margaret's rejection. Not hope exactly, something quieter but more durable. Possibility. The next 3 weeks were brutal. Spring weather in Montana meant unpredictable storms, temperature swings, and mud that sucked at your boots like it had personal grievances. They worked through it all. The platform was rebuilt, reinforced 3 times over. The bell housing was constructed, a peaked roof structure that would protect the bell from weather while allowing the sound to carry. The bell itself arrived on a Tuesday, delivered by wagon from Helena. It was beautiful, bronze, maybe 200 pounds, with a clear, pure tone when they tested it. The children gathered around, taking turns ringing it gently while Eliza supervised. It's perfect, Emma breathed. Almost, Samuel corrected. Still needs to be installed. That was the final challenge. Getting a 200-pound bell up 15 feet and secured properly required planning, muscle, and nerve. They rigged a pulley system using ropes and the tower's own framework. Caleb supervised while Finch, Merrick, and Daniel hauled. It took 2 hours of careful coordination, several close calls, and enough swearing to make Pastor Whitmore frown from across the street. But when that bell finally hung in its housing, secured and tested and ready, the sense of accomplishment was overwhelming. Ring it, Eliza told Emma. The little girl grabbed the rope with both hands and pulled. The sound that emerged was clear and bright, echoing across the valley, rolling over the town like a declaration. Caleb felt it in his chest. That sound. Felt it in the bones of his hands and the ache of his back and the scars on his knuckles. He'd built this. They'd built this. And it was real and solid and permanent. The children cheered. The volunteers clapped. Even some townsfolk who'd gathered to watch applauded, though a few looked like they weren't sure if they should. Finch walked over and extended his hand. Good work, Vance. Caleb shook it. Couldn't have done it without help. No, but you started it. That takes guts. Finch glanced at the tower, then back at Caleb. I'm making you a full partner at the forge. 50-50 split on profits. You've earned it. It took a moment for the words to register. Partner? You're good at the work, you're reliable, and you saved my life. Seems like enough qualification. Finch grinned. Besides, I'm getting old. Need someone who can handle the heavy hammering. Yes. Thank you. Don't thank me. Just keep showing up. That evening, the orphanage held a small celebration. Nothing fancy, just stew and bread and apple cider that one of the miners had donated. The children were loud and energetic, hyped up on accomplishment and sugar. The adults were tired but satisfied. Caleb found himself sitting next to Eliza on the orphanage steps, watching the chaos through the window. You did it, she said. We did it. No, this was you. Everyone else helped, but you're the one who made it happen. She looked at him. The town sees that, even the ones who don't want to admit it. Margaret doesn't. He hadn't meant to say it. The name just slipped out, carrying with it all the bitterness he'd tried to bury. Eliza was quiet for a moment. Margaret's scared. Of everything. Of being alone, of making mistakes, of being hurt again. Rejecting you wasn't about you. It was about her fear. Doesn't make it hurt less. No, it doesn't. She touched his arm lightly. But holding on to that hurt doesn't serve you either. You've built something here, Caleb. More than a tower. You've built a place for yourself. Don't let her rejection define that. She was right. He knew she was right. But letting go of the anger, the shame, the sense of being too much, that wasn't something that happened overnight. Still, sitting there with Eliza, listening to the children laugh inside and watching the last light fade from the sky, Caleb felt something shift. Not healing exactly, but the possibility of it. The next morning, he woke to pounding on his door. "Vance!" Mrs. Brennan's voice, urgent. "Get down here!" He threw on clothes and stumbled downstairs, his mind racing through possibilities. Fire? Accident? Disaster at the forge? What he found was worse. The boarding house common room was full. Mrs. Brennan, her husband the doctor, Pastor Whitmore, Charles Whitmore, and 4 other men Caleb recognized as town council members. They all looked at him with expressions ranging from concern to suspicion. "What's going on?" Caleb asked. "There was an incident last night," Charles Whitmore said, "at the general store. Someone broke in, stole money and supplies." "Okay, what's that got to do with me?" "You're new to town. You work with metal, could pick locks, and you've been—" Whitmore hesitated. "Visible lately." The implication hit like a fist. "You think I robbed the store?" "We're not accusing anyone," Pastor Whitmore said quickly. "We're just asking questions." "Where were you last night between 10 and midnight?" Charles asked. "Here, in my room." "Anyone see you?" "I was asleep, so no." The men exchanged glances. Caleb's anger started building, hot and familiar. After everything, after the tower, after saving Finch, after weeks of proving himself, they still saw him as the outsider who didn't belong. "This is ridiculous," Mrs. Brennan said sharply. "Caleb's been a model tenant. He's never caused trouble." "We have to investigate," Charles insisted. "The store owner saw someone large leaving the scene." "Someone large? In a town full of miners and loggers?" Caleb's voice was hard. "That narrows it down. Look, we just need to—" The door opened and Eliza walked in. She took in the scene with one glance and her expression went cold. "What is this?" she demanded. "Official town business," Charles said. "It's a witch hunt." She moved to stand beside Caleb. "You're accusing him because he's convenient, not because he's guilty." "Miss Hart, with respect, don't you dare." Her voice cut like steel. "This man has given this town more in 3 months than most of you have in years. He built something for children who had nothing. He saved a life. And this is how you repay him? By assuming he's a criminal?" "The evidence." "What evidence? Someone large?" "Half the men in this town fit that description." She crossed her arms. "If you're going to accuse someone, bring proof. Otherwise, this conversation is over." The room went silent. Charles Whitmore looked like he wanted to argue, but his uncle put a hand on his arm. "She's right," Pastor Whitmore said quietly. "We don't have proof, just suspicion and convenience." He looked at Caleb. "I apologize. This was handled poorly." "You think?" Caleb's jaw was tight. "I've spent 3 months trying to prove I belong here, trying to show I'm more than the joke everyone made me out to be. And the second something goes wrong, I'm the first one you suspect." "That's not—" "It is. It's exactly that." He looked at each of them. "I didn't rob your store. But you've already decided I'm guilty, so what's the point of defending myself?" He walked out, pushed past them, through the door, into the cold morning air that felt cleaner than the room he'd left. His hands were shaking, not from fear, from rage. Behind him, he heard Eliza's voice, still sharp and angry, tearing into the men who'd come to accuse him. He kept walking. Down the street, past the forge, past the general store with its broken window now boarded up, past the church and the orphanage, and out to the edge of town where the trees started. He walked until his breathing evened out and the anger subsided into something colder and more manageable. Then he sat on a fallen log and stared at nothing. This was what he'd feared, what he'd always feared, that no matter what he did, no matter how hard he worked or how much he gave, he'd always be the outsider. Too much, too big, too wrong. Footsteps crunched in the snow behind him. He didn't turn around, but he knew who it was. Eliza sat beside him, close enough that their shoulders almost touched. "You shouldn't have done that," Caleb said. "Defended you?" "Made them angry. They're powerful in this town. They're idiots in this town, she sighed. I'm sorry. They had no right. They had every right. It's their town. I'm just passing through. You're not passing through. You live here. You work here. You built something here. She turned to look at him. Caleb, what they did was wrong, but don't let it erase everything you've accomplished. What have I accomplished? A tower? So what? I'm still the man Margaret rejected. Still the first one they suspect when something goes wrong. Right now, yes, but give it time. I've given it time. 3 months of time. 3 months in a town that's existed for 10 years. That's nothing. Her voice was firm. Change is slow. Trust is slower. But it's happening. I've seen it. You're seeing what you want to see. No, I'm seeing what's there. She was quiet for a moment. When I came to this town 5 years ago, you know what they called me? The scarred woman. The charity case. People crossed the street to avoid me. Parents told their children not to stare. It took 2 years before anyone would have a real conversation with me. Caleb looked at her, surprised. I built the orphanage out of spite as much as charity, Eliza continued. I wanted to show them I was more than a scar, more than a tragedy, and slowly, they started to see it, started to see me. She met his eyes. You're doing the same thing, building something that forces them to see you. It's working. It's just not working fast enough for either of us. What if it never works? What if I'm always going to be the outsider? Then you'll be an outsider who built a bell tower and saved a man's life and earned a partnership at the forge. She smiled slightly. There are worse things to be. They sat in silence, watching morning light filter through the trees. Slowly, Caleb's anger cooled into something more manageable. He was still furious, still hurt, but Eliza's presence was steadying. Thank you, he said finally, for standing up for me. Someone had to. They'll talk about you now. About us. Let them talk. She stood, brushing snow from her skirt. Come on, we have work to do. What work? Finding whoever actually robbed that store. Because I don't believe in letting injustice stand. Despite everything, Caleb almost smiled. You're stubborn. I prefer determined. She offered her hand. You coming? He took it and stood. Her hand was small in his, rough with calluses, and surprisingly strong. They walked back to town together, and if people stared or whispered, Caleb tried not to notice. The robbery investigation continued for 3 more days. In the end, it was Tommy, the young miner who delighted in needling Caleb, who got caught. He'd been stealing to cover gambling debts, and when confronted, he confessed immediately. No one from the town council came to apologize to Caleb directly. Charles Whitmore nodded awkwardly when they passed on the street. Pastor Whitmore mentioned something about misunderstandings during Sunday service, but there was no formal acknowledgement, no public clearing of his name. Caleb hadn't expected one. What he got instead was quieter. More people nodded when he passed. Conversations didn't stop when he entered the saloon. Mrs. Chen gave him an extra roll with his bread purchase. Small gestures, but they mattered. And Eliza. She became a constant in his life, not dramatically, but steadily. They'd have coffee after his work at the forge. She'd bring the children by to see the bell tower they'd helped build. They'd talk about nothing and everything, her past back east, his years of drifting, the small absurdities of frontier life. Somewhere in those conversations, something shifted between them. Caleb couldn't pinpoint when exactly. Maybe it was the afternoon she laughed so hard at one of his stories that she nearly fell off the fence they were sitting on. Maybe it was the evening he found her crying in the orphanage office over paperwork she couldn't make balance, and instead of leaving, he sat with her until she felt better. Maybe it was the accumulation of 100 small moments that added up to something neither of them had planned. One evening in early June, they were walking back from the general store where Eliza had been buying supplies for the orphanage. The sun was setting, painting the mountains gold and purple. The air was warm for the first time in months. Caleb, Eliza said suddenly, why did you really stay? After Margaret rejected you, after the town made it clear you weren't welcome. You could have left, should have left. Why didn't you? He thought about it, really thought about it. I was tired, he said finally. Tired of running, tired of letting other people decide I didn't fit. I figured if I was going to be too much for someone, it might as well be on my terms. And now? Now I've got a partnership at a forge, a tower I built, and he stopped walking, looked at her. And I've got you. Eliza went very still. Caleb, I know. I know I'm not much. I know I'm still the man who got rejected in front of the whole town, but you see me different, and that means... He struggled for words. That means more than I can say. She reached up, touched his face gently. You're not nothing. You're not too much. You're exactly enough. And then she kissed him. It wasn't dramatic, wasn't desperate or passionate or any of the things the dime novels talked about. It was gentle and real, and it felt like coming home. When they pulled apart, Eliza was smiling. The town's really going to talk now. Let them. They walked the rest of the way to the orphanage with their hands linked, and Caleb felt something he hadn't felt in years. Contentment. Not happiness. That was too simple. But contentment. The sense that he was exactly where he was supposed to be. The tower stood against the darkening sky, its bell catching the last light. He'd built that. Built it with his hands and his stubbornness and his refusal to accept that he didn't belong. And maybe, just maybe, he was building something else too. Something that looked a lot like a future. News of the kiss spread through Millward Creek faster than cholera, and with about the same level of panic among certain quarters. Mrs. Chen smiled knowingly when Caleb came in for bread. Daniel Ross clapped him on the shoulder at the forge with a grin that said he approved. Even Finch raised an eyebrow and muttered something about it being high time. But not everyone was pleased. 3 days after that evening walk, Margaret Talbot showed up at the forge. Caleb was working on a set of hinges, the metal glowing red hot, when she appeared in the doorway like a ghost from a life he'd tried to forget. "Mr. Vance," she said, "may I have a word?" Finch glanced at Caleb, then at Margaret, and found sudden urgent business in the back room. Caleb set down his hammer and wiped his hands on his apron, his stomach nodding. "Mrs. Talbot." "It's Miss. I never remarried after Henry died." She stepped into the forge, her posture rigid. "I heard about you and Eliza Hart. Word travels. In this town?" "Always." She folded her arms, and Caleb noticed her hands were shaking slightly. I wanted to tell you that I think you're making a mistake." The audacity of it hit him like a slap. "Excuse me?" She's damaged. That scar, her past, the way she throws herself into that orphanage like she's trying to atone for something. You don't know her the way this town does." Caleb felt anger rising, hot and immediate. "And you don't know me. You made that clear 5 months ago." "I was protecting myself." "From what? Me being too tall? Too big? Too much?" He took a step toward her and she flinched. "You invited me here, made promises, then took one look and decided I wasn't worth the effort." "Because you scared me." The words burst out of her, raw and honest. "You walked off that wagon and you were so much, and all I could think was that Henry was small and quiet and safe, and you were none of those things. I panicked." "So you humiliated me in front of the entire town." I know I did." Margaret's voice cracked. "And I've regretted it every day since. Watching you build that tower, watching you win people over, watching you become exactly the kind of man I told myself I wanted. It's been torture." Caleb stared at her, trying to process what he was hearing. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying I made a mistake. I'm saying maybe we could—" "No." The word came out flat and final. Margaret blinked. "No? You had your chance. You made your choice. I'm not interested in being your second option after you've had time to reconsider." "But Eliza saw me when I was nothing, when this whole town had written me off as a joke. She treated me like a person, not a problem to be solved or a risk to be managed." His voice was steady, but underneath it was steel. "So no, Margaret. Whatever you think you want now, it's too late." She looked like he'd struck her. For a moment, he almost felt sorry for her. Almost. Then he remembered standing in the street with his bag in hand while she walked away, and the sympathy evaporated. "I see," Margaret said quietly. "I suppose I deserve that." "You do." She turned to leave, paused at the door. "She's lucky." Eliza, I hope she knows that. I'm the lucky one. After she left, Finch emerged from the back room. That was uncomfortable. Yeah, you handled it well. Didn't feel like it. Caleb picked up his hammer, but his hands were shaking now too. 5 months ago, if she'd said those things, I would have taken her back in a heartbeat, would have been pathetically grateful. But not now. No, not now. He looked at the red-hot metal on the anvil. Funny how things change. That evening, he told Eliza about the encounter. They were sitting on the orphanage steps again. It had become their spot, a place where they could talk without the weight of the town watching. She listened without interrupting, her expression unreadable in the fading light. How do you feel about it? She asked when he finished. Angry, vindicated, confused. He rubbed his face. She called you damaged. I am damaged. Eliza said it simply, without self-pity. The fire that gave me this scar also killed my mother. I carry that. I'll always carry that. That's not... It's okay. Damage doesn't mean broken. She looked at him. Margaret's afraid of damage because she thinks it's contagious, that if she gets too close to hurt people, she'll hurt too. But hurt is just part of living, you know? You can't avoid it by choosing safe. Is that what I am? Not safe? She laughed softly. Caleb, you're the least safe choice I could have made. You're too big, too honest, too present. You take up space in a way that demands people notice you, but that's exactly why I chose you. Chose me, like I'm a horse at auction. You know what I mean. She bumped his shoulder with hers. Margaret wanted someone who wouldn't challenge her, wouldn't push her to grow. She wanted comfortable. I don't want comfortable. I want real. Real is messy. Good. I like messy. They sat in comfortable silence for a while. Then Caleb said, She's going to make trouble, isn't she, Margaret? Probably. Rejected women often do, and this town loves drama. Eliza sighed. But we'll handle it. She was right about the trouble, though it came from an unexpected direction. 2 weeks later, a man arrived in Millward Creek on the afternoon stage. He was well-dressed, with the kind of polished appearance that marked him as someone from back east. He checked into Mrs. Brennan's boarding house, asked questions around town, and by dinner time, everyone knew why he was there. His name was Howard Hart, Eliza's brother. Caleb was having dinner at the boarding house when Howard walked into the common room. He was tall, lean, with the same strong bone structure as Eliza, but none of her warmth. His eyes swept the room, landed on Caleb, and narrowed. You must be Vance, he said. The room went quiet. Every boarder turned to watch. That's right, Caleb said carefully. I'd like a word. Privately. They went out to the front porch. The evening was warm, insects buzzing in the gathering dusk. Howard pulled out a cigarette, lit it, and studied Caleb with undisguised assessment. My sister wrote me about you, Howard said finally. Said she'd found someone worth knowing. I wanted to see for myself. And? And I'm not impressed. Caleb felt his jaw tighten. That's unfortunate. You're a drifter, a blacksmith with no prospects beyond a partnership in a frontier forge. You were publicly rejected by another woman just months ago. Howard took a drag on his cigarette. What exactly do you have to offer my sister? That's between me and her. She's vulnerable. That orphanage, those children. She pours everything into them because she's trying to fill a hole that can't be filled. She needs someone stable, someone with resources, someone who can actually help her instead of just being another mouth to feed. I'm not a mouth to feed. I work. I earn. $4 a week? Howard's tone was dismissive. That's nothing. I could give her 10 times that just in allowance. She doesn't want your allowance. She wants her independence. What she wants and what she needs are different things. Howard flicked ash off his cigarette. I came here to take her home. Back east, where she belongs. Where she can find a proper match, not some frontier nobody who happened to build a tower. Caleb's hands clenched into fists. She's not going anywhere. And she's not a child you can order around. She's my sister, my responsibility. She's a grown woman who makes her own choices. Choices she'll regret if I don't intervene. Howard's eyes were cold. I've seen men like you before, Vance. Big, rough, good with their hands. You think that's enough, but it's not. My sister deserves better than a blacksmith's wife in a town that's barely a step up from wilderness. What Eliza deserves is respect, and the freedom to decide her own life. Spoken like someone who has nothing else to offer. Howard dropped his cigarette and ground it under his heel. I'm giving you fair warning. Stay away from my sister. If you care about her at all, you'll let her go. He walked back inside, leaving Caleb standing on the porch with anger burning through his chest. Every word Howard had said was designed to hit where it hurt. The poverty, the rejection, the sense of not being enough. And damn it, some of it landed. Caleb walked to the orphanage. He found Eliza in her office, bent over paperwork by lamplight. She looked up when he knocked, and her smile faded when she saw his expression. Your brother's in town, he said. I know. He came by earlier. She set down her pen. What did he say to you? That I'm not good enough for you. That you deserve better. That he's taking you back east. Caleb leaned against the doorframe. Is he right? About which part? Any of it. Eliza stood, came around the desk. Howard thinks money and status equal worth. He's wrong. He's been wrong about me for years. She took Caleb's hands. I'm not going back east. I'm not leaving my orphanage, or my children, or you. Is that clear enough? He said you're vulnerable, that you're trying to fill a hole. I am trying to fill a hole, the one my mother left when she died. But I'm filling it with purpose, not by running back to a life I never wanted in the first place. Her grip tightened. Howard's scared. He's always been scared of me choosing my own path because it means he can't control me. Don't let him get in your head. Too late for that. Then let me get in there instead. She pulled him down and kissed him, firm and certain. When she pulled back, her eyes were fierce. You're enough, Caleb Vance. More than enough. And anyone who can't see that is blind. But Howard wasn't done. Over the next week, he made his presence felt throughout town. He spoke to the town council about the orphanage's finances, raising questions about Eliza's management. He visited the church, suggesting to Pastor Whitmore that perhaps Eliza was becoming too attached to someone unsuitable. He even went to the forge, offering Finch money to dissolve the partnership. Finch, to his credit, told Howard exactly where he could shove his money. That man's a piece of work, Finch said after Howard left. Acts like his sister's a piece of property. He thinks he's protecting her, Caleb said, though the words tasted bitter. From what? Happiness? Finch spat tobacco juice into the dirt. Some people can't stand seeing others build something good. They've got to tear it down, convince themselves they're doing the right thing. The tension came to a head on a Saturday afternoon. The town had gathered for a community meeting in the church, something about improving the main road and raising funds for a new schoolhouse. Caleb attended because Eliza asked him to, though he would have rather been anywhere else. Howard stood during the open comment period. I'd like to address a concern, he said, his voice carrying through the church. It's come to my attention that my sister Eliza Hart has been forming an attachment to a man who just 6 months ago was rejected by another woman in this very town. A man with no standing, no family, and no prospects beyond manual labor. The church went silent. Every eye turned to Caleb sitting in the back row. I understand frontier life requires different standards, Howard continued. But surely we can agree that the woman who runs our orphanage, who cares for our most vulnerable children, deserves a partner of substance and character, not someone who's barely established himself here. Charles Whitmore stood up. Mr. Hart, with respect, this isn't appropriate. Isn't it? The children she cares for deserve stability. What happens if this attachment leads to marriage? To children? Can a blacksmith's wages support an orphanage and a family? That's enough. Eliza's voice cut through the room like a blade. She stood from her seat near the front, her face pale but composed. Howard, you've made your opinion clear, but my personal life is not community business. It is when it affects the orphanage. The orphanage is fine, better than fine. We're stable, well-managed, and the children are thriving. She looked around the church, making eye contact with people she'd known for years. My brother came here because he thinks I need saving, from my choices, from my life, from my own judgment. But I don't. What I need is for him to respect that I'm an adult who makes her own decisions. Eliza, I'm not finished. Her voice was steel wrapped in silk. Caleb Vance has shown more character in 6 months than most men show in a lifetime. He built a bell tower for children he didn't know. He saved a man's life at risk to his own. He's earned a partnership through skill and dedication, and he's treated me with more respect and kindness than anyone I've ever known. She turned to look at Howard. So if you came here to convince me he's not worthy, you failed, because I've already decided. He's exactly who I want. The church erupted in whispers. Howard's face went red. He opened his mouth to respond, but Pastor Whitmore spoke first. I think we've strayed from our agenda, the pastor said diplomatically. Perhaps we should table this discussion and return to the matter of the road improvements. But Howard wasn't done. He strode down the aisle toward Caleb, his expression dark. You did this, turned her against her own family. Caleb stood slowly, his full height making Howard take an involuntary step back. I didn't turn her against anything. She made her own choice. You're poison. A nobody pretending to be something more. Howard! Eliza was coming down the aisle now. Stop it! You'll ruin her, Howard said, still staring at Caleb. Mark my words. One day she'll wake up and realize she gave up everything for a man who couldn't give her anything. Something in Caleb snapped. Not violently, he'd learned long ago that his size made violence dangerous, but something fundamental shifted. He'd spent months proving himself, months accepting judgment and whispers and doubt. He was done. You're right, Caleb said quietly. I can't give her money or status or a life back east. All I can give her is myself, my work, my loyalty, my respect. If that's not enough for you, I don't care, because it's enough for her. He looked past Howard to Eliza. I love you. I should have said it sooner, but I'm saying it now. I love you, and I'm not going anywhere. The church went completely silent. Eliza's eyes were bright, maybe with tears, maybe with something else. I love you too. Howard looked between them, his expression caught between fury and despair. You're making a mistake. Then it's my mistake to make, Eliza said firmly. Howard turned and walked out of the church. The door slammed behind him with a sound like finality. Pastor Whitmore cleared his throat. Well, that was unexpected. Perhaps we should take a short break before continuing. The meeting dissolved into chaos. People talking over each other, some coming up to congratulate Eliza and Caleb, others whispering in corners. Caleb found himself surrounded by well-wishers, and the curious shaking hands and accepting congratulations he wasn't sure he'd earned yet. Finch appeared at his elbow. You know you just proposed, right? In front of everyone? I didn't propose. I just said I loved her. Same thing in a town like this. Finch grinned. Congratulations, you fool. You're getting married whether you plan to or not. Caleb looked across the room to where Eliza was surrounded by her own group of people. She caught his eye and smiled, and something in his chest settled into place. Maybe Finch was right. Maybe he'd just committed to something bigger than he'd intended. But looking at Eliza, he couldn't bring himself to regret it. That evening, after the chaos subsided and the town had returned to its gossip and speculation, Caleb and Eliza sat on their steps at the orphanage. The children were inside, supervised by one of the older girls, and the night was warm enough that they didn't need coats. So, Eliza said, you love me. Apparently I announced it to the entire town. Very romantic. Unexpected, but romantic. She leaned against his shoulder. Howard left on the evening stage. Didn't even say goodbye. I'm sorry. Don't be. He'll come around eventually, or he won't. Either way, it's his choice. She was quiet for a moment. Did you mean it? About not going anywhere? Yes. Because you know what marriage means, right? You'd be taking on 7 children along with me, the orphanage, the responsibility, all of it. I know. And you're okay with that? Caleb thought about it, really thought about it. 6 months ago, he'd come to this town expecting one kind of life. He'd been rejected, humiliated, reduced to nothing. But somehow, through work and stubbornness and sheer refusal to quit, he'd built something better. Not easier, not simpler, but real. I'm okay with it, he said finally. More than okay. Good. Eliza took his hand, laced her fingers through his. Because I was going to propose to you next week anyway. You just saved me the trouble. He laughed, surprised. You were? I had a whole speech planned. Very eloquent, very touching. Now you've ruined it. Sorry. You should be. But she was smiling. Guess we'll have to get married now. The whole town expects it. Guess so. They sat in comfortable silence, watching stars emerge in the darkening sky. The tower Caleb had built stood silhouetted against the mountains, its bell catching starlight. He'd built that. Proof that he belonged, that he could create something lasting. Now he was building something else, something that scared him more than any tower could. A life, a family, a future. But looking at Eliza, feeling the warmth of her hand in his, he thought maybe, just maybe, he was ready for it. The next morning, Caleb woke to pounding on his door again. This time it was Daniel Ross, looking panicked. "Fire at the orphanage," Daniel shouted. "The bell's ringing. Get everyone." Caleb was moving before his brain caught up. He threw on clothes, grabbed his boots, and ran. Others were already emerging from houses, miners, loggers, shopkeepers, everyone responding to the bell's urgent clanging. The orphanage wasn't fully engulfed, but smoke poured from the kitchen window. Flames licked at the wooden siding, spreading fast in the dry summer air. Eliza was in the yard with the children, counting heads frantically. "Is everyone out?" Caleb shouted over the noise. "Emma's not here." Samuel's voice was high with panic. "She was in her room, second floor." Caleb didn't hesitate. He ran toward the burning building while people shouted behind him. The front door was hot to the touch, smoke already thick inside. He pulled his shirt over his mouth and pushed in. The smoke was worse than expected, choking and blinding. He knew the layout from his visits: stairs to the left, Emma's room second door on the right. He climbed through heat that felt like it was peeling his skin off, found the room, kicked the door open. Emma was huddled in the corner, coughing, tears streaming down her face. Caleb grabbed her, wrapped her in his arms, and turned back the way he'd come. The stairs were burning now, flames eating through the wood. He took them anyway, felt one step give beneath his weight, kept moving through momentum and desperation. They burst through the front door into chaos. Hands grabbed Emma, pulled her to safety. Someone threw water on Caleb. He hadn't realized his sleeve was smoldering. Eliza was there, sobbing, checking Emma over while the little girl coughed and gasped. Behind them, the orphanage burned. The town had formed a bucket brigade, but it was clear the building couldn't be saved. They focused on keeping the fire from spreading to nearby structures. It took 3 hours to get it under control, and by then, the orphanage was a smoking ruin. Caleb sat on the ground, his lungs burning, watching everything Eliza had built turn to ash. She stood beside the ruins, her face streaked with soot and tears, silent. The children huddled together, scared and homeless. Again. Finch appeared beside Caleb, handed him water. "That was stupid. Had to get the kid." "I know. Still stupid." Finch looked at the ruins. "She'll need help rebuilding." "Yeah. Town will pitch in. After what you just did, they'll help." He paused. "You're a hero, Vance. Whether you like it or not." Caleb didn't feel like a hero. He felt like his lungs were full of glass and his skin was on fire and everything hurt. But Emma was alive, wrapped in a blanket and clinging to Eliza. That was something. Pastor Whitmore organized temporary housing for the children. They'd stay with families around town until the orphanage could be rebuilt. Eliza would stay with Mrs. Brennan. The arrangements were made quickly, efficiently, the town responding to crisis the way frontier communities did, with practical help and minimal fuss. That night, Caleb found Eliza sitting outside Mrs. Brennan's boarding house. She wasn't crying anymore, but her eyes were red-rimmed and exhausted. He sat beside her. "How are you?" "I built that place. Spent 5 years making it a home for children who had nowhere else. And in 3 hours, it's gone." Her voice was flat. "All that work, all that time, just gone." "We'll rebuild." "With what money? Insurance won't cover everything. I spent most of my inheritance on the first building." She looked at him. "You almost died today. For Emma. For my orphanage." "For you," Caleb corrected. "And I'd do it again." "I know. That's what scares me." She leaned against him. "What if next time you don't make it out? What if I'm building all this and it just keeps burning down?" "Then we rebuild again. as many times as it takes. Why? Because those kids need you. Because this town needs what you built. Because giving up isn't who you are. He turned her face toward his gently. We'll figure it out. Together. She kissed him, tasting of smoke and salt and exhaustion. When she pulled back, there was something different in her eyes. Not hope exactly, but determination. Okay, she said. Together. The town meeting happened 3 days after the fire. The church was packed, every seat filled, people standing along the walls. Caleb sat in the back with Finch, his hands still bandaged from the burns he'd gotten pulling Emma out. They weren't bad burns, just enough to hurt and remind him how close things had been. Charles Whitmore stood at the front, papers in hand. We've assessed the damage to the orphanage. The structure's a total loss. Foundation might be salvageable, but everything else needs to be rebuilt from scratch. What's the cost? Someone called out. Approximately $800. That includes materials and labor. The number hung in the air like a death sentence. $800 was a fortune in a town where most people earned $20 a month if they were lucky. The town fund has $73, Whitmore continued. Miss Hart's personal savings amount to $42. That leaves us significantly short. What about donations? Pastor Whitmore asked. We're organizing a collection. Every bit helps. But realistically, we're looking at a year, maybe 18 months before we can raise enough. A year? Eliza stood from her seat near the front. Those children can't wait a year. They need stability now. They need a home. We understand, Miss Hart, but without the funds, then we find another way. Her voice carried authority. We use volunteer labor. We source cheaper materials. We make this work. With respect, Charles said carefully, volunteer labor only goes so far. People have their own work, their own families, and cheaper materials mean a structure that won't last. So what are you suggesting? That we give up? I'm suggesting we be realistic about timelines. The room erupted in overlapping conversations. Some people argued for pushing forward immediately. Others insisted waiting was more practical. A few suggested the children be sent to other towns, other orphanages, a solution that made Eliza's face go pale. Caleb stood. The room gradually quieted as people noticed his height, remembered what he'd done 3 days ago. I'll build it, he said. Everyone turned to stare. The orphanage. I'll build it. Same as the tower. Volunteer work, nights and weekends. He looked at Eliza, then at the crowd. We get materials donated or at cost, and I'll do the construction. It'll take longer than hiring a crew, but it'll get done. Mr. Vance, Charles said slowly, that's an enormous undertaking. The tower was one thing, but an entire building? You're talking months of work. I know. And you'll do this for free? While maintaining your partnership at the forge? Yes. Why? The question came from someone in the crowd. Caleb couldn't see who. Why would you sacrifice that much? He could have given them the noble answer. Could have talked about community and duty and doing what's right, but the truth was simpler and more complicated. Because I'm going to marry Eliza Hart, Caleb said. And those children will be mine as much as hers. You don't let your family go homeless if you can help it. The room went completely silent. Then someone started clapping. Someone else joined in. Within seconds, the whole church was applauding, and Caleb felt his face flush hot. Eliza was staring at him, tears streaming down her face, but she was smiling. Well then, Pastor Whitmore said when the applause died down, I suppose we have our answer. All in favor of accepting Mr. Vance's proposal, the construction proposal, that is, say aye. The ayes were unanimous. After the meeting, people swarmed Caleb with offers of help. Daniel Ross volunteered his carpentry skills. Merrick said he'd donate labor on weekends. Mrs. Chen offered to organize meal deliveries for the workers. Even people who'd been cold to Caleb months ago were suddenly eager to contribute. Margaret Talbot approached, her expression carefully neutral. That was generous of you. It's necessary, Caleb said shortly. Still, she hesitated. I wanted to apologize for what I said about Eliza and for everything before that. I was wrong. Yeah, you were. She flinched at the bluntness but didn't argue. I hope you'll be happy, both of you. We will be. She nodded and walked away, and Caleb felt nothing. No anger, no satisfaction, nothing. Margaret Talbot had become irrelevant to his life, and there was a freedom in that. Eliza found him outside the church, grabbed his face with both hands, and kissed him hard enough that someone whistled. "You proposed to me in front of the entire town," she said when they broke apart. Again. Getting to be a habit. Apparently. She was still crying, but laughing too. "You're insane, building an entire orphanage by yourself?" "Not by myself, people volunteered." "Still, it's months of work. Backbreaking, exhausting work on top of the forge." "I know. And you're doing it anyway." "Yes." She kissed him again, softer this time. "I love you, even if you are completely insane. Love you too." The work began the following Sunday. First step was clearing the ruins, hauling away burned timber, salvaging what could be saved, preparing the foundation. It was hot, dirty, miserable work. The smell of smoke still clung to everything, and every board they pulled away revealed more damage. But people showed up, more than Caleb expected. Daniel and Merrick, of course, but also younger men from the mines, families from town, even some of the shop owners who closed their stores for a few hours to help. They worked in shifts, passing buckets of debris, stacking salvageable materials, slowly revealing the foundation beneath. Emma watched from a safe distance, still skittish around fire and smoke. The other children helped where they could, carrying water, organizing tools, keeping spirits up with their chatter. Samuel worked alongside the adults, insisting he was strong enough despite his thin frame. "You don't have to prove anything," Caleb told him during a water break. "Yes, I do." Samuel wiped sweat from his face. "This is my home. Was my home. I want to help rebuild it." "Then pace yourself. This is going to take months. Can't burn yourself out in the first week." The boy nodded reluctantly and went back to work at a slower pace. By the end of that first day, the site was cleared. The foundation was exposed, cracked in places, but mostly intact. They'd need to repair it before building, but it was a start. Caleb stood looking at the empty space where the orphanage had been, trying to visualize what would replace it. Bigger this time, he thought. More rooms for the children. Better ventilation, stone chimney instead of brick to reduce fire risk. A place that could last. "What are you thinking?" Eliza came to stand beside him, her dress dusty and torn at the hem. "Thinking about design. Making it better than before." "Better how?" "Safer. Stronger. Room to grow if you need to take in more children." He glanced at her. "That okay with you?" "It's more than okay. It's..." She searched for words. "It's exactly what I would have asked for if I thought we could manage it. We'll manage it." Over the next 2 weeks, plans took shape. Caleb sketched designs by lamplight after exhausting days at the forge. Eliza provided input: how many beds per room, where the kitchen should be, storage needs. They argued about details, compromised on others, slowly building something on paper that felt right. The town council approved the plans with surprising speed. Materials started arriving: lumber from the sawmill at cost, nails and hardware donated by the general store, windows salvaged from a building being demolished in Helena. It wasn't charity exactly, more like a collective investment in something the town had decided mattered. Construction began in earnest in late July. The foundation repairs came first, Caleb and Merrick mixing concrete by hand, pouring it into cracks, reinforcing weak points. It was brutal work in the summer heat, but it had to be done right. Everything else would rest on this foundation. Then came the framing. This was where Caleb's tower experience paid off. He understood load-bearing structures, knew how to distribute weight, could visualize the finished building in 3 dimensions. Daniel Ross proved invaluable here, his carpenter's eye catching mistakes before they became problems. They worked every weekend and most evenings. Caleb would put in a full day at the forge, grab a quick dinner, then head to the construction site for 3 or 4 more hours. His body protested constantly, his back ached, his hands were permanently sore, his old rib injury flared up whenever he lifted something heavy wrong. But the building grew. Slowly, stubbornly, it took shape. Not everything went smoothly. Wood warped in the heat. Measurements were off, requiring adjustments. They lost a week to rain that turned the site into mud. One of the support beams cracked during installation and had to be replaced. Small disasters, but they added up. 6 weeks in, Caleb was ready to collapse. He'd lost weight, his clothes hanging looser. Dark circles under his eyes made him look older. Even Finch was concerned. "You're going to kill yourself," Finch said one afternoon at the forge. "I can see you shaking. When's the last time you slept more than 4 hours?" "I'm fine." "You're not fine. You're running on fumes and stubbornness." But Finch set down his hammer. "Take a day off. Rest." "Can't. We're behind schedule." "There is no schedule. You made up a timeline that was too aggressive, and now you're killing yourself trying to meet it. Those kids need a home. Those kids need you alive and healthy more than they need a building 3 weeks earlier." Finch moved to block Caleb's path. "Go home. Sleep. That's an order from your partner." Caleb wanted to argue, but his body was screaming for rest, and maybe Finch was right. Maybe he was pushing too hard. He went back to the boarding house and slept for 14 hours straight. When he woke, Eliza was sitting in the chair beside his bed, reading a book. She looked up when he stirred. "How long have you been here?" His voice was rough from sleep. "About an hour. Mrs. Brennan let me in. She's worried about you. Everyone is." "I'm fine." "You're not. And before you argue, let me say this. I appreciate what you're doing more than I can express, but not at the cost of your health." She closed the book. "We need to adjust expectations. Maybe take on fewer evening work sessions. Maybe accept that it'll take longer than planned. But nothing. I'd rather have you alive and the orphanage done in 6 months than have you collapse and delay everything anyway." She leaned forward. "This is supposed to be a partnership, remember? That means I get a say in whether my future husband works himself to death." Future husband? The word settled into Caleb's chest, warm and real. "You're right," he admitted. "I've been pushing too hard." "I know. It's one of the things I love about you. You don't know how to do anything halfway. But there's a difference between determination and self-destruction." They compromised. Evening work sessions dropped from 5 nights a week to 3. Sundays remained full construction days, but Saturdays became half-days. It was still a punishing schedule, but manageable. The building continued to rise. Walls went up, defining rooms and spaces. The roof framing was completed by mid-September, a skeleton against the sky that made the children cheer. Windows were installed, real glass, not just shutters. The stone chimney went up last, taking a full week but worth it for the safety it provided. By October, the exterior was complete. It looked like a real building now, not just a construction site. 2 stories painted white with blue trim that Emma had insisted on. A wide porch across the front, room for 14 children comfortably, with space to expand if needed. The interior work was slower, more detailed. Floors had to be laid and sanded. Walls needed finishing. The kitchen required particular attention: counters, shelving, a stove that Finch helped install. Bedrooms were divided and furnished with beds donated by various families. Eliza threw herself into the finishing work, sewing curtains and organizing donations of blankets and clothes. The children helped too, painting their own rooms in colors they chose, turning blank spaces into homes. November brought the first serious snow. Construction became harder, the cold making every task more difficult. Caleb's hands cracked and bled despite the gloves. His breath came in clouds. But they were so close now, close enough to smell the finish line. The week before Thanksgiving, they completed the last major piece: the heating system, a combination of fireplaces and a central wood stove that would keep the whole building warm. Caleb tested it personally, staying overnight to ensure even heat distribution, making adjustments where needed. It worked. On Thanksgiving morning, Eliza and the children moved back into the orphanage. They'd been scattered across town for 4 months, living with families who'd taken them in. Now they gathered in the large common room of their new home, staring around in wonder. "It's bigger than before," Samuel said quietly. "Much bigger." Emma ran from room to room, examining everything. "And it smells like new wood instead of smoke." "Is this really ours?" one of the younger boys asked. "Really yours," Caleb confirmed. "Built to last this time." The town held Thanksgiving dinner at the orphanage, a celebration and housewarming combined. Tables were set up in the common room, food appeared in overwhelming quantities, and for a few hours the building was full of noise and warmth and life. Caleb stood in the doorway watching, exhausted, aching, but satisfied in a way he'd never experienced before. He'd built this. With help, yes, but he'd led the work, made the decisions, turned plans into reality. "You did good," Finch said, appearing beside him with a plate of turkey. "We did good. Couldn't have done it alone." "Still, you're the one who made it happen." Finch took a bite of turkey. "Town sees that. They see you different now." Caleb looked around the room. Mrs. Chen was helping serve food. Charles Whitmore was talking to Pastor Whitmore. Daniel Ross was showing some of the children a card trick. Even Margaret Talbot was there, though she kept her distance. "Different how?" Caleb asked. "Like you belong. Like you're one of us." Finch shrugged. "Took you most of a year, but you got there." Belonging. That word again. But this time, looking around the room, feeling the warmth of the building he'd created, Caleb thought maybe it was true. Maybe he did belong now, not because people had forgotten his arrival or Margaret's rejection, but because he'd built something they couldn't ignore, couldn't dismiss, couldn't look away from. He'd made himself matter. After dinner, after the guests had left and the children were in bed, Caleb and Eliza stood on the porch of the new orphanage. The night was cold, stars brilliant in the clear sky. Snow covered the ground in patches, reflecting moonlight. "We should set a date," Eliza said. "For what?" "Our wedding. You've proposed to me twice now in public. People are starting to wonder when we're actually getting married." "When do you want to?" "Spring? After the snow melts, maybe April?" She leaned against him. "Give us time to actually plan something instead of just announcing it." "April sounds good. Your brother going to come? Family you want to invite?" Caleb shook his head. "No family. Haven't talked to my brother in 8 years. Parents are dead. It's just me." "Not anymore. You've got 7 children now, and a fiancé, and a partner at the forge, and a whole town that's decided you're worth keeping around." She squeezed his hand. "You're not alone anymore, Caleb." The truth of that hit him harder than expected. He'd been alone for so long, drifting from place to place, never staying, never connecting. He told himself it was by choice, that he preferred it that way. But standing here with Eliza, looking at the building he'd constructed for children who needed him, he realized how much of a lie that had been. He'd been terrified of belonging because belonging meant the possibility of rejection. And rejection, for someone who'd been told his whole life he was too much, felt like confirmation of his worst fears. But Millward Creek had rejected him, then watched him refuse to leave, then slowly, grudgingly, accepted him. Not because he'd changed or shrunk himself to fit their expectations, because he'd built something they couldn't deny. "Thank you," he said quietly. "For what?" "For seeing me when no one else would. For treating me like a person instead of a problem. For," he struggled for words, "for making me believe I could have this." "You could always have it. You just needed to stay in one place long enough to build it." She kissed him softly. "Besides, I'm selfish. I wanted you for myself." Selfish, right. Very selfish. I saw a big, capable blacksmith and thought, there's someone who could build me an orphanage. She was smiling. "Didn't hurt that you were handsome in a rough, been-through-hell kind of way." "Handsome? Nobody's ever called me that." "Then everyone else is blind." She pulled him toward the door. "Come on. Help me get the kitchen organized before we go. These children are going to want breakfast, and I need to know where everything is." They spent an hour in the kitchen, Eliza directing while Caleb lifted and moved things into place. It was domestic and ordinary and somehow perfect. This, he thought, was what he'd been looking for without knowing it. Not grand gestures or dramatic moments, just the quiet work of building a life with someone who saw him clearly and chose him anyway. When they finally left the orphanage, walking back toward town together, Caleb felt something he hadn't felt since arriving in Millward Creek 10 months ago. Peace. Not happiness exactly, that was too fragile, too dependent on circumstances. But peace. The deep, steady certainty that he was exactly where he belonged. The next morning, he was back at the forge. Finch had orders backed up, a set of gates for the new schoolhouse, tools for the mine, repairs on 6 wagons. Normal work. Routine work. The kind of work that built a life slowly, day by day. "You look better," Finch observed. "Less like you're about to keel over." Feel better. Good. Because I've got news. Finch pulled out a letter. Town council voted. They want to commission a new project, a proper town hall. They're asking if you'd be interested in leading the construction. Caleb stared at the letter. They want me to build a town hall. Paid work this time, not volunteer. They're allocating budget. Finch grinned. Seems you've got a reputation now. The man who builds things that last. A reputation. 10 months ago, he'd had a different reputation. The giant who got rejected, the fool who traveled across the country for nothing. Now he was the man who built things that lasted. The transformation felt unreal. But looking at the letter, at Finch's proud expression, at the forge where he worked every day, Caleb realized it was real. He'd changed the story. Not by becoming someone different, but by refusing to accept the story others tried to write for him. Tell them yes, Caleb said. But not until after the wedding. I'm not missing my own wedding because of a construction deadline. Finch laughed. Smart man. Eliza would kill you. She would. They worked through the morning, hammer and anvil, heat and metal. Familiar rhythm, satisfying in its simplicity. At lunch, Caleb walked to the orphanage to check on the heating system. The children were there, playing in the common room while Eliza supervised schoolwork. Mr. Vance! Emma ran over, grabbed his hand. Come see my room. I painted flowers on the wall like you showed me. He let himself be dragged upstairs, examined the surprisingly good flowers Emma had painted, praised her work properly. Samuel was in the next room reading. The boy looked up, nodded in greeting, went back to his book. Comfortable, easy. This was family now, loud, chaotic, sometimes overwhelming, but family. Downstairs, Eliza was reviewing addition problems with two of the younger children. She looked up when Caleb appeared, smiled, mouthed, "Thank you," for checking on things. He nodded and left, not wanting to interrupt the lesson. Walking back to the forge, he passed people who nodded in greeting. Mrs. Chen waved from her bakery. Mr. Patterson called out about needing a horseshoe repair. Even Charles Whitmore, who'd never quite warmed to Caleb, gave a respectful nod. Respect. That's what had changed. Not friendship necessarily, not even liking in all cases, but respect. The acknowledgement that he'd earned his place through work and persistence and refusing to quit. It was enough. Winter settled over Millward Creek with the kind of cold that made your teeth ache just breathing. December brought snow that piled 3 feet high in places, and the wind off the mountains cut through even the thickest coat. But inside the forge, the heat from the coals kept things bearable, and Caleb found himself grateful for work that warmed you from the inside out. The town hall commission was official now, paper signed, budget allocated. Construction wouldn't start until spring, but the planning phase had already begun. Caleb spent evenings sketching designs, consulting with Charles Whitmore and the council members about what they needed. It was strange, sitting in rooms with men who'd once looked at him like he was a problem to be solved, now treating him like an expert whose opinion mattered. We want something that makes a statement, Charles said during one meeting. Something that says Millward Creek is here to stay. Stone foundation, Caleb suggested. Wood frame, but stone at the base, gives it weight, permanence, and a bell tower, smaller than the orphanage one, but visible from anywhere in town. Can we afford that? If we source the stone locally and use volunteer labor for the foundation work, yes. Charles made notes. You've thought about this. It's what I do now, apparently. Think about buildings. The comment got a small smile from Charles, which was progress. They'd never be friends, too much history, too much difference in how they saw the world, but they could work together. That was something. Wedding planning took up whatever time Caleb had left. Eliza wanted simple, ceremony at the church, reception at the orphanage, nothing fancy. But simple still required decisions. When exactly in April? Who would officiate? What about food? Where would they live after? That last question was the hardest. Caleb's room at the boarding house was too small. The orphanage had space, but not privacy. They needed their own place. We could build, Eliza suggested one evening. They were sitting in the orphanage kitchen, going through donated supplies. A small house, nothing elaborate. With what money? I'm not taking a commission on the town hall work. It goes to the partnership with Finch. I have some savings left. Not much, but enough for materials if we do the labor ourselves. After I just spent 6 months building the orphanage, you want me to build another structure? I want us to have a home, our own space. She looked at him. Unless you'd rather wait? Caleb thought about it. The idea of building yet another structure made his back ache just thinking about it. But the idea of having a home, a real home, not a rented room or borrowed space, that was compelling. Where would we build? He asked. There's a lot behind the orphanage, about an acre. It's part of the property. She pulled out a rough map. We could put a house here close enough to the orphanage that I can check on the children easily, far enough for privacy. Small house, 2 rooms plus a kitchen, nothing fancy. Nothing fancy, she agreed, just ours. They shook on it, and Caleb felt the weight of yet another commitment settle onto his shoulders. But this time the weight felt different. Not a burden. More like ballast, the kind that keeps a ship steady. Construction on their house began in January despite the cold. Caleb worked on it when he could, usually Sundays after church, and occasionally on weekday evenings when the light lasted. The foundation went in slowly, fighting frozen ground and snow that had to be cleared repeatedly. But by February, the basic frame was up, and the structure was starting to look like something. The children helped when weather permitted, carrying tools and materials, holding boards steady while Caleb hammered. Emma appointed herself supervisor, which mostly meant she gave directions no one followed and asked questions constantly. "Why are you making the roof pointy?" she asked one Sunday. "So snow slides off instead of piling up and collapsing the roof." "Why don't you just make the roof stronger?" "Because making the roof pointy is easier and cheaper." "But, Emma," Samuel called from across the site, "come help me with this." The girl ran off, and Caleb caught Samuel's eye, mouthed, "Thank you." The boy just grinned. Samuel had grown over the winter, taller, broader in the shoulders, his voice dropping into something closer to a man's register. He'd be 15 soon, old enough to apprentice somewhere if he wanted. Caleb had been meaning to talk to him about that. "You thought about what you want to do?" Caleb asked during a break. "After you're old enough to leave the orphanage?" Samuel looked uncomfortable. "Leave? You don't have to. But most folks start apprenticing around 15, 16, learning a trade. I could stay at the orphanage? Long as you want. Eliza's not going to kick you out just because you hit some arbitrary age." Caleb took a drink of water. "But if you wanted to learn something, blacksmithing, carpentry, whatever, now's the time." "Could I learn smithing from you and Mr. Finch?" The question caught Caleb off guard. "You want to be a blacksmith?" "Maybe. I like working with my hands and watching you build stuff. It seems like you're making things that matter, not just making money, but making things people need." Caleb felt something warm and unexpected in his chest. "I'll talk to Finch. See if we can take you on as an apprentice after the wedding." "Really?" "Really? But you'll work. No special treatment just because you're family." "Family," Samuel repeated, like he was testing the word. "That's what we'll be? After you marry Miss Hart." "That's what we are now. The wedding just makes it official." The boy smiled, and for the first time since Caleb had known him, Samuel looked his age, just a kid, hopeful and nervous and trying to figure out his place in the world. March brought the thaw, mud, and a letter from Howard Hart. Eliza read it at breakfast, her expression unreadable. When she finished, she set it down carefully like it might explode. "He's coming to the wedding," she said. Caleb looked up from his coffee. "Your brother?" "Says he wants to apologize, make amends." She pushed the letter across the table. "Do you believe that?" Caleb skimmed the letter. The handwriting was precise, the language formal. Howard expressed regret for his previous behavior, acknowledged he'd been wrong, hoped to attend the wedding and begin rebuilding our relationship on proper foundations. "Could be genuine," Caleb said finally. "Could also be him wanting to save face. Show the family back east he tried." "Which do you think it is?" "Does it matter? If he comes and causes trouble, we handle it. If he's sincere, then maybe you get your brother back." "I don't know if I want him back. Not after what he said about you, about us." Caleb reached across the table, took her hand. "He's your family, only family you've got besides the children and me. If there's a chance to fix that, might be worth taking. You're more forgiving than I am. I'm practical. Holding grudges is exhausting, and I'm already tired." She laughed despite herself. "Fine. He can come. But if he says one wrong word, I'll throw him out myself. The wedding was set for April 15th. Simple ceremony, just like Eliza wanted. Pastor Whitmore would officiate. The whole town was invited, and the reception would be at the orphanage with food provided by various families. Caleb's contribution was finishing the house. He worked doubled shifts in the weeks leading up to the wedding, determined to have it ready. The roof went on in early April. Windows followed. Interior walls were finished and painted white because Eliza said white made small spaces feel bigger. A wood stove for heating, a kitchen with a proper pump for water, 2 bedrooms, one for them, one that could be a nursery eventually. The week before the wedding, Finch helped him move in furniture. Not much, a bed Daniel Ross had built as a wedding gift, a table and chairs from Mrs. Brennan, a dresser salvaged from someone's attic. Basic necessities, but it was enough. Not bad for a year's work, Finch said, looking around the small house. You've come a long way from sleeping in a church pew. Feels like longer than a year. That's because you packed about 5 years of living into 12 months. Finch clapped him on the shoulder. You did good, Vance. Real good. The night before the wedding, Caleb couldn't sleep. He lay in his boarding house room. Last night here, Mrs. Brennan had insisted he stay until after the ceremony, and thought about the year that had passed. 12 months ago, he'd been standing in the street with his bag, watching Margaret walk away, feeling like the world's biggest fool. Now he had a partnership in a forge, a house he'd built with his own hands, a town that respected him, and tomorrow he'd marry a woman who saw him clearly and loved him anyway. 7 children would become officially his. The transformation was so complete it didn't feel real. But it was real. The calluses on his hands were real. The house behind the orphanage was real. The love he felt for Eliza was as real as the hammer and anvil at the forge. He'd done this. Built this life from nothing but stubbornness and refusal to quit. The morning of the wedding dawned clear and warm, perfect spring weather. Caleb dressed in the suit Eliza had insisted he buy, felt uncomfortable and confined in the formal clothes, but wore them anyway because it mattered to her. The church filled early. Seemed like the entire town had turned out, along with people from neighboring settlements who'd heard about the wedding. Caleb stood at the front with Pastor Whitmore, trying not to fidget, while the church buzzed with conversation. Then the door opened and everyone turned. Eliza walked down the aisle alone, no father to give her away. No elaborate procession. She wore a simple dress, cream-colored, with her hair down in a way Caleb had never seen before. The scar on her face was visible, and she made no attempt to hide it. She looked beautiful and strong and absolutely certain. Behind her, the 7 children from the orphanage followed in their best clothes, Emma grinning wide enough to split her face, Samuel looking solemn and proud. When Eliza reached the front, she took Caleb's hands and he felt them trembling slightly. Nervous. She was nervous. Somehow that made him feel better. He wasn't the only one scared of what they were promising each other. Pastor Whitmore began the ceremony. Caleb heard maybe half of it, too focused on Eliza's face, the weight of her hands in his, the reality of this moment. Do you, Caleb Vance, take Eliza Hart to be your lawfully wedded wife? I do. And do you, Eliza Hart, take Caleb Vance to be your lawfully wedded husband? I do. Then, by the power vested in me, I pronounce you husband and wife. You may kiss the bride. Caleb leaned down, still self-conscious about the height difference even now, and kissed his wife. The church erupted in applause, and somewhere in the back, someone whooped. They walked back down the aisle together, Eliza's hand in his, past faces that had once been hostile or indifferent, now smiling and congratulating. Mrs. Chen was crying, Finch was grinning, even Charles Whitmore looked pleased. And in the back row, Howard Hart stood with the rest. He was clapping, his expression carefully neutral. When Caleb met his eyes, Howard nodded once, acknowledgement, maybe even respect. The reception at the orphanage was loud and chaotic and perfect. Tables groaned with food, roasted chicken, potatoes, bread, pies, and cakes from every good cook in town. Someone had brought a fiddle, and music filled the common room. Children ran wild, adults talked and laughed, and for a few hours the new building was exactly what it was meant to be, a place full of life and joy. Howard approached Caleb while Eliza was distracted by well-wishers. Mr. Vance? Howard extended his hand. Congratulations. Caleb shook it, wary. Mr. Hart, I wanted to apologize for how I behaved last time, for the things I said. Howard looked uncomfortable but sincere. I was wrong about you, about what my sister needed. I see that now. What changed your mind? Your letters. At Caleb's confused expression, Howard explained. Eliza wrote me about the fire, the orphanage being rebuilt, how you led the construction, about this house you built, about the town hall commission. He glanced around the room, about how you became someone this community relies on. That's not the drifter I met 9 months ago. I'm the same person, just found a place worth staying for. Maybe. Howard was quiet for a moment. I was protecting her from the wrong thing. I thought I was saving her from making a mistake. But the real mistake would have been taking her away from the life she'd built. He met Caleb's eyes. Take care of her. Always. Howard nodded and moved away, and Caleb felt something release in his chest. Not forgiveness exactly. Howard's words last year had cut deep, but acceptance, the understanding that people could be wrong and learn from it. Eliza appeared at his elbow. What did Howard say? That he was wrong, that we should be happy. Miracles do happen. She looped her arm through his. Come on, Emma wants to make a speech, and if we don't let her, she'll explode. The speech was adorable and rambling, mostly Emma talking about how Mr. Vance was very tall, but also very nice, and how Miss Hart, Mrs. Vance now, was the best person in the world, and how they were all a family now, and wasn't that wonderful? She got a standing ovation, largely because she was 7 and earnest and impossible not to love. As evening approached and the celebration wound down, Caleb found himself outside on the orphanage porch with Finch and Daniel, watching the sun set behind the mountains. Hell of a year, Daniel said. Hell of a year, Caleb agreed. Got any regrets? Finch asked. About staying? About all of this? Caleb thought about it honestly. The pain, the exhaustion, the months of judgment and doubt, the cracked ribs, the burns, the constant work that left him barely standing, the humiliation of that first day standing in the street while a whole town watched him get rejected. No, he said finally. No regrets. Good. Finch pulled out a flask, took a drink, passed it to Caleb. Because I'm retiring next year. Forge is all yours if you want it. Caleb nearly choked on the whiskey. What? I'm 63. My back hurts, my hands shake, and I'm tired. Been thinking about it for a while. Finch took the flask back. You're ready, more than ready. You could run that forge in your sleep by now. But nothing. It's yours. We'll work out the details, but I'm out by next spring. Finch grinned. Besides, you'll need the income. Heard Eliza wants more children. We haven't even talked about that yet. You will, and when you do, you'll need a bigger house and more money and all the things families need. Finch stood, groaning as his knees popped. Point is, you've got a future here, a real one. Don't screw it up. After they left, Caleb sat alone on the porch, watching darkness settle over the town. Lights appeared in windows. The bell tower at the orphanage was silhouetted against the sky. The first thing he'd built here, proof that he could create something lasting. Now he'd built so much more. A house, a family, a place in a community that had tried to reject him and failed because he'd refused to leave. There you are. Eliza came out, wrapped in a shawl against the evening chill. Hiding from your own wedding reception? Just thinking. About? About how different things are from a year ago, how different I am. She sat beside him, close enough that their shoulders touched. You're not that different. You're still stubborn and too willing to work yourself to death. Still too big for most doorways. Thanks. But you're also happier, more settled. She took his hand. You found what you were looking for, didn't you? Whatever it was that kept you drifting all those years. Caleb considered that. What had he been looking for? Acceptance, maybe. Belonging. Proof that he wasn't too much, wasn't wrong, wasn't fundamentally broken. I found home, he said simply. Found a place where being too much was exactly what was needed. It was needed. You were needed. She leaned her head on his shoulder. Still are. Those children in there, our children now, they need you. I need you. The town needs you. Heavy burden? Good thing you're strong enough to carry it. They sat in comfortable silence, watching stars appear one by one in the darkening sky. Inside, the children were getting ready for bed, their voices carrying through the windows. Tomorrow, Caleb and Eliza would move into their own house, start their married life properly. But tonight, they sat in the space between old life and new, savoring the transition. Caleb? Eliza's voice was soft. Yeah? Thank you. For staying. For fighting for this. For not giving up when you had every reason to. Thank you for seeing me when no one else would. She turned her face up to his, and he kissed her properly this time, without an audience or time pressure or anything except the two of them and the life they'd built together. When they finally went inside, the children were waiting. Emma launched herself at Caleb, demanding to be picked up one more time before bed. Samuel helped organize the younger ones. The middle children chattered about the wedding, about the food, about Emma's speech. This was family. Loud and chaotic and exhausting and perfect. Caleb helped get everyone settled, checked that the stove was banked properly, made sure all the doors were locked. Domestic tasks that felt significant because they were his now. His responsibility, his family, his home. Later, walking back to their new house with Eliza, passing through the quiet town, Caleb felt the weight of the past year settle into something manageable. The shame and anger had faded, replaced by something harder to name but easier to carry. Contentment, maybe. Purpose. Their house was small and basic, but walking through the door felt like arriving somewhere he'd been searching for his whole life. Eliza lit the lamps, and warm light filled the space. Their space. Not borrowed, not temporary, but theirs. "Welcome home," Eliza said. Home. The word that had eluded him for 30 years of drifting finally made sense. The months after the wedding fell into a rhythm that felt both new and familiar. Caleb worked the forge with Finch, learning the business side of running the operation in preparation for taking over. Evenings were spent at home with Eliza or at the orphanage with the children. Weekends brought church and community obligations and the slow but steady construction of the town hall. Samuel started his apprenticeship in May, showing up at the forge every morning with an eagerness that reminded Caleb of himself at that age. The boy was a quick study, learning the basics of metalwork with focus that belied his years. "You're good at this," Caleb told him one afternoon after Samuel successfully completed his first horseshoe. "You're a good teacher." Samuel examined the horseshoe critically. "It's not perfect." "Nothing's perfect the first time, or the 100th time. You just get better at hiding the mistakes." Summer brought heat and tourists, people passing through on their way to somewhere else, stopping in Millward Creek to rest or resupply. Some of them asked about the bell tower, which had become something of a landmark. Others noticed the town hall construction and made comments about the town's growth. Millward Creek was changing, more permanent structures replacing temporary ones, new families arriving to settle, not just prospect and leave. A sense that the town was past its rough frontier phase and becoming something more stable. Caleb was part of that change. The town hall, when it was completed in August, stood as proof, 2 stories of solid construction with a bell tower that echoed the orphanage's design. The council held a dedication ceremony, and Charles Whitmore gave a speech about progress and community and the future. "None of this would be possible without the dedication of men like Caleb Vance," Charles said, gesturing to where Caleb stood uncomfortably in the crowd. "A year and a half ago, he was a stranger. Now he's one of us. He's built structures that will outlast all of us, and in doing so, he's built a legacy." The crowd applauded, and Caleb felt his face flush. He'd never been comfortable with attention, and all these people staring at him made his skin crawl. But Eliza was there, smiling up at him with pride in her eyes, and that made it bearable. After the ceremony, people kept coming up to shake his hand, thank him, tell him how much they appreciated his work. Mrs. Chen hugged him, which was mortifying. Daniel clapped him on the back hard enough to hurt. Even Margaret Talbot approached, congratulated him briefly before moving away. Awkward, but not hostile. "You did it," Eliza said when they finally escaped the crowd. "You became exactly what this town needed." "I just built some buildings." "You built more than that. You built trust. You built respect." She squeezed his arm. "You built a life." That night, lying in bed beside his wife, Caleb thought about legacy. He'd never considered that before. The idea that he might leave something behind, that his work might matter past his own lifetime. The buildings would stand for decades if they were maintained properly. The children at the orphanage would grow up and remember the man who built their home. The town would tell stories about the stranger who stayed and changed everything. It was more than he'd ever imagined having. September brought news that made Eliza cry happy tears and made Caleb feel both excited and terrified. She was pregnant. "Are you sure?" he asked, watching her face for signs this was a joke. "Dr. Brennan confirmed it this morning. We're having a baby." "A baby. Our baby." "Yes, Caleb. That's generally how it works." She was smiling through tears. "Are you happy?" "I'm terrified." "Good. Me too." She took his hands. "But we'll figure it out, like we figured out everything else." The children were delighted when they found out, Emma most of all. She immediately claimed the baby as hers and started making plans for teaching it everything she knew. Samuel looked quietly pleased, like he was happy to not be the oldest anymore. The younger ones just seemed excited about the general chaos a baby would bring. Finch was less subtle. "About time. Took you long enough." "We've been married 5 months." "Exactly. I was starting to think you didn't know how it worked." Winter came again, the second one since Caleb had arrived in Millward Creek. This time, the cold didn't feel hostile. The forge kept him warm during work hours, and coming home to Eliza and their small house felt like sanctuary. They'd talk about the baby, names, where to put the cradle, how they'd manage with Eliza's orphanage duties, making plans for a future that felt real and solid. Eliza's pregnancy progressed without major complications. She kept working at the orphanage until January, when Dr. Brennan finally insisted she slow down. Caleb took over some of her duties, managing supplies, organizing schedules, making sure the heating system worked properly. The children adapted, helping more, complaining less. "You're good at this," Samuel told him one evening. They were reviewing the orphanage's accounts together, teaching Samuel basic bookkeeping. "Taking care of everyone. Just doing what needs doing." "No, it's more than that." Samuel looked at him seriously. "You make people feel safe, like everything's going to be okay even when it's hard." Caleb didn't know what to say to that. He'd never thought of himself as someone who made others feel safe. If anything, his size usually had the opposite effect. But looking at Samuel, this kid who'd been wary and suspicious 15 months ago, now relaxed and confident, maybe there was truth to it. "You make me feel safe too," Caleb said finally. "All of you. Knowing you're here, that we're family, it's the first time I've felt like I belonged somewhere." "Then we're even." The baby came in April, almost exactly a year after the wedding. Labor was long and difficult, and Caleb spent most of it pacing outside the bedroom door while Dr. Brennan and Mrs. Brennan attended to Eliza. The children waited at the orphanage, Samuel keeping them occupied, all of them anxious. When the baby finally arrived, a girl, healthy and loud, Caleb felt something shift fundamentally in his chest. He held his daughter for the first time, this tiny person who was part him and part Eliza, and understood finally what people meant about love that transformed you completely. "She's perfect," Eliza said weakly from the bed. "She is." "What should we name her?" They'd discussed names for months without deciding. Now, looking at his daughter's face, Caleb knew. "Hope," he said. "We should name her Hope." Eliza smiled. "Hope Vance. I like that." The children came to meet their new sister the next day, filing into the bedroom with varying degrees of excitement and nervousness. Emma wanted to hold her immediately and had to be convinced that babies were fragile. Samuel hung back, but his expression was soft when he looked at the baby. "She's so small," one of the younger children whispered. "You were that small once," Eliza said. "Was I really?" "Every baby is." They took turns holding Hope carefully, and Caleb watched his family, because that's what they were now, officially and completely, and felt something close to peace. The months that followed were exhausting. Hope didn't sleep well, which meant neither did Caleb or Eliza. The orphanage still needed attention, the forge demanded work, and somehow they had to balance everything without dropping any of the spinning plates. But they managed. Eliza got the children to help more with Hope, teaching them about responsibility and care. Caleb adjusted his forge hours, bringing the baby with him sometimes when Eliza needed rest. The town, having decided Hope was partially theirs by virtue of who her parents were, pitched in with meals and babysitting and advice. It took a village, the saying went. Caleb was starting to understand why. 2 years after arriving in Millward Creek, Caleb stood outside the forge at sunset watching the town. Hope was strapped to his chest in a carrier Eliza had made, sleeping peacefully despite the noise and movement. Samuel was inside, closing up the forge for the night, practicing the routines he'd need when he eventually took over. The bell tower at the orphanage caught the last light, and Caleb heard it ring, calling the children to dinner, a sound that had become so familiar he barely noticed it anymore. But tonight, he paid attention. That bell existed because he'd built the tower that held it. The orphanage existed because he'd refused to let it stay burned. The town hall stood because he'd led its construction. The house behind the orphanage held his wife and his life. He'd built all of this. Not alone, never alone, but he'd been the catalyst, the force that made it happen. 2 years ago, he had stood in this same street with nothing but rejection and a bag in his hand. Now, he had everything. "Mr. Vance?" A voice interrupted his thoughts. He turned to find a young man standing there, travel-worn and nervous, maybe 25, with a letter clutched in his hand. "Yeah? I'm looking for work. Someone back east said Millward Creek was a good town for people starting over, that you might know of opportunities." Caleb studied him, saw the desperation under the nervous exterior, the hope that things could be different here than wherever he'd come from. "What's your name?" Caleb asked. "James. James Fletcher." "You good with your hands, James?" "I'm learning. Willing to work hard." "Everyone says that. Doing it's different." Caleb shifted Hope slightly, and she stirred but didn't wake. "Tell you what. Come by the forge tomorrow morning, 6 sharp. We'll see what you can do. No promises, but I'll give you a fair shot." James's face lit up. "Thank you, Mr. Vance. I won't let you down." "See that you don't." After James left, Caleb smiled to himself. Maybe this kid would work out, maybe he wouldn't, but giving someone a chance, that felt right. Someone had given him a chance once. Multiple someones, actually. Finch, Eliza, even the town eventually. Now he could do the same. Samuel emerged from the forge, locked the door. "Who was that?" "Someone new, looking for work." "You gonna hire him?" "Maybe, we'll see." Caleb started walking toward home. "Come on. Eliza's probably got dinner ready, and I'm starving." They walked through town together, Caleb, Samuel, and baby Hope, past the general store where Margaret had rejected him, past the church where he'd slept that first awful night, past the boarding house where he'd lived for months, past the saloon, the newspaper office, the schoolhouse. Every building held memories now. Not all good, but all his. When they reached the house, Eliza was on the porch, watching for them. She took Hope from Caleb, cooed at the baby, then kissed him. "Good day?" she asked. "Good enough. New guy showed up looking for work. You going to help him?" "Probably." "Soft heart," she teased. "Says the woman running an orphanage." "Fair point." She led them inside where the smell of stew filled the small house. "Samuel, can you set the table? And make sure the younger ones wash their hands before they come over." The boy nodded and headed to the orphanage to collect the children for dinner. It had become their routine, everyone eating together most nights, the house and orphanage functioning as one connected unit. The children arrived in their usual chaos, talking over each other about their day. Emma had learned a new song. One of the boys had seen a fox. The youngest had fallen and scraped her knee, but was very brave about it. Dinner was loud and messy and perfect. This was what Caleb had built. Not just structures, but a family. A life that sprawled beyond what he'd imagined possible. After dinner, after the children had gone back to the orphanage for bed, after Hope was asleep in her cradle, Caleb and Eliza sat on their porch. The night was warm for April, stars brilliant overhead. "Do you ever think about that first day?" Eliza asked, "when Margaret turned you away?" "Sometimes." "Do you regret it? Any of it?" Caleb thought about it honestly. The humiliation, the pain, the months of proving himself, the exhaustion and doubt and fear that he'd never be enough. "No," he said finally. If she'd said yes, I'd have married her and probably been miserable. Would have spent my life feeling too big for her small world. This... He gestured vaguely at everything, the house, the town, the life they'd built. This is better, worth every hard moment. Even being publicly rejected? Even that. Because it forced me to stay and fight instead of running, and fighting led to this. Eliza took his hand, laced their fingers together. I'm glad you stayed. Glad you fought. Me too. They sat in comfortable silence, and Caleb felt the weight of 2 years settle into something solid and permanent. He'd arrived in Millward Creek as a rejected stranger, too much for anyone to accept. He'd leave it, eventually, years from now, as someone who'd changed everything, who'd built structures that would outlast him and raised children who'd remember him and loved a woman who saw him clearly and chose him anyway. He'd expanded the world instead of shrinking to fit it, proved that being too much wasn't a flaw, but the reason he could build things others couldn't. The bell tower at the orphanage stood silhouetted against the night sky, and somewhere in the darkness, that bell would ring tomorrow morning, calling children to breakfast. A sound he'd made possible, a future he'd helped create. Caleb Vance had arrived in Millward Creek with nothing but a bag and broken pride. Now he had everything that mattered, and that made all the difference.